He seemed like everything you'd been waiting for: emotionally available, financially stable, respectful of your independence. He said all the right things. He understood you in ways no one else ever had. Your friends were happy you'd finally found someone. You thought you'd gotten smarter about relationships, learned from past mistakes, developed the wisdom to spot a toxic partner from miles away. But something's not right. You can't quite put your finger on it, but 6 months in, maybe a year, you don't recognize your own life anymore. Your savings are somehow depleted. Your best friend doesn't call anymore. You cancelled book club again this week. You're walking on eggshells, though you can't explain why. You question your own memory about conversations you know you had. And the man who seemed so perfect, he's still there, still saying he loves you, but you feel more alone than you've ever felt in your life. If you're a woman over 50 and any of this sounds familiar, you need to keep watching, because what I'm about to share with you could save you from years of heartache and protect everything you've spent a lifetime building. Narcissists have evolved. They've learned to hide, and they're specifically targeting accomplished, mature women like you. Today, we're exposing exactly how they do it. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the complexities of modern relationships and empower women with the knowledge they need to protect their hearts and their futures. If you're new here, this is a safe space where we discuss real talk about dating, relationships, and the psychological patterns that can make or break your happiness. And if you're returning, welcome back to our community of strong, intelligent women who refuse to settle for less than they deserve. Before we dive into today's crucial topic, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you find value in this video, please hit that like button. It helps us reach more women who need to hear this message. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences, because your story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. Share this video with any friends who might benefit from this information. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our content. We're building a community here, and your voice matters. And if you really want to support the work we do, consider sending a super thanks. It helps us continue creating this important content for women like you who deserve the truth. Now, let's address what brought you here today. You're intelligent, you're experienced. You've navigated decades of life, relationships, career challenges, and personal growth. You thought that by this stage of your life, you'd developed the radar to spot manipulative, toxic partners. You've read the articles. You know the obvious red flags. You're not some naive 20-year-old who can be easily fooled. And yet, here you are, watching this video, because something feels wrong in your relationship and you can't quite articulate what it is. Here's the unsettling truth we need to address. The narcissist of today doesn't look like the narcissist of yesterday. They've adapted. They've studied what doesn't work, the obvious controlling behaviors, the early rage episodes, the blatant disrespect, and they've evolved past those amateur mistakes. They've created a more sophisticated playbook, one specifically designed to fool intelligent, experienced women exactly like you. These aren't the stereotypical narcissists you learn to recognize. They don't announce themselves with obvious red flags. They don't rage and control from day one. Instead, they disguise themselves as exactly what you've been searching for: a mature, emotionally available, financially stable partner who seems to understand you in ways no one else ever has. They study you, they mirror you, they become your perfect match until the mask begins to slip, and by then, you're already deeply invested. What makes this particularly dangerous for women in their 50s, 60s, and beyond is what you have to lose. You've worked your entire life to build financial security. You might have a paid-off house, retirement savings carefully accumulated over decades, a pension, investment income, or simply the emotional reserves that come from years of giving and caring. You're not desperate. You're not looking for someone to take care of you. You're simply human, wanting companionship, connection, and love in this chapter of your life. And narcissists know exactly how to exploit that very reasonable, very healthy desire. Whether you're newly single after a long marriage, widowed and ready to open your heart again, or you've been on your own for years and finally feel ready for partnership, you're particularly vulnerable right now. Not because you're weak, but because you're hopeful. And hope, when targeted by a skilled manipulator, can be weaponized against you. The stakes are higher now than when you were younger. Your time is more precious because you're acutely aware that you don't have unlimited years ahead. Your emotional energy is more valuable because you've learned how finite it is. Your financial security is more important because you're at or approaching retirement, when rebuilding becomes significantly harder. And your heart, though it may have healed from past hurts, might not bounce back as easily or as quickly as it once did. This isn't about age being a limitation. This is about recognizing that you've earned the right to protect what you've built. You deserve a partner who enhances your life, not one who systematically dismantles everything you've worked for. So today, we're going to walk through 10 critical signs that you're dating a narcissist in disguise. These aren't the obvious red flags you already know about. These are subtle, insidious behaviors that slip under your radar precisely because they're packaged as love, concern, compatibility, or even personal growth. We'll explore the psychology behind each behavior, provide real-world examples that will sound disturbingly familiar to many of you, and most importantly, give you clear action steps for what to do if you recognize these patterns in your current relationship. This is going to be an in-depth, honest conversation. We're not sugarcoating anything, because you deserve the unvarnished truth. You've earned the right to understand exactly what you might be dealing with. And if you discover through this video that you are indeed dating a narcissist in disguise, you'll walk away with not just awareness, but a clear roadmap for protecting yourself and reclaiming your life. We're going to cover each sign thoroughly, because surface-level information isn't enough. You need to understand not just what these behaviors look like, but why they work, how they're deployed, and how to distinguish them from normal relationship dynamics. You need to be equipped to recognize manipulation even when it's dressed up as devotion. Are you ready to see clearly? Are you ready to trust yourself again? Are you ready to learn how to spot these disguises before they cost you years of your life? Let's begin. Side 1. The customized perfect partner syndrome. The first sign that you might be dating a narcissist in disguise is something that feels wonderful in the beginning. Almost too wonderful. It's what we call the customized perfect partner syndrome, and it's one of the most deceptive tools in a sophisticated narcissist's arsenal. Here's how it works. When you first meet this person, they seem like everything you've ever wanted. And I don't mean in a general way. I mean they seem specifically, perfectly tailored to your exact needs, desires, and dreams. They love the same obscure music you love. They share your passion for gardening or traveling or whatever hobby you've mentioned. They have the same values about family, the same political views, the same life philosophy. They finish your sentences. They seem to understand you in ways that even your closest friends don't. It feels like fate. It feels like the universe finally heard your prayers and sent you your soulmate. But here's what's actually happening. A narcissist in disguise is conducting sophisticated reconnaissance on you. In our digital age, this is easier than ever. They're not just scrolling through your social media, they're studying it like it's a textbook. They're noting what you post about, what you like, what causes you engage with, what frustrates you, what excites you. They're paying attention to everything you say in conversations, cataloging your preferences, your past relationship disappointments, your current needs, your future hopes. And then they're creating a persona specifically designed to meet every single one of those needs. It's not authentic compatibility, it's strategic mirroring. They become a customized, perfect partner built specifically for you because they've done their homework. Let me give you a real-world example. Margaret, a 62-year-old retired teacher, met David at a community volunteer event. Margaret had been divorced for 5 years after a 30-year marriage to a man who had been emotionally distant and rarely showed affection. She'd mentioned in her dating profile that she valued emotional openness and communication. She'd posted on social media about her love for classical music and her frustration that her ex-husband had always refused to attend concerts with her. David seemed like a dream come true. He was emotionally expressive from day one, telling Margaret how he felt about things, sharing his fears and hopes, asking her about her feelings. He mentioned that he had season tickets to the symphony and would love to take her. He talked about how important open communication had been to him in his life and how he'd learned from past relationships that emotional availability was the foundation of real love. Margaret felt seen for the first time in decades. Here was a man who understood her, who valued what she valued, who wanted what she wanted. Within weeks, she was falling deeply in love. But here's what Margaret didn't know. David's social media history, which he carefully curated before pursuing her, showed no previous interest in classical music. His ex-wife later revealed that he'd actually hated concerts and considered them boring. He'd never been particularly emotionally open in his previous relationship. In fact, he'd been accused of being cold and calculating. But he'd studied Margaret. He'd identified what she needed. And he'd become exactly that, temporarily. This is what makes the customized perfect partner syndrome so dangerous. It's not that the person is showing you their best self, which everyone does in early dating. It's that they're showing you a completely manufactured self that may have little to no basis in who they actually are. They're method actors playing the role of your perfect partner, and they're playing it so convincingly that you never question whether it's real. Now, you might be thinking, how do I tell the difference between someone who genuinely shares my interests and someone who's faking it? Here are the subtle distinctions to watch for. First, pay attention to depth of knowledge. Someone who genuinely loves classical music can talk about specific composers, periods, performances they've seen. They have opinions formed over years of engagement. Someone who's faking it will speak in generalities, deflect detailed conversations, or quickly change the subject. They might say they love classical music, but when you start discussing the nuances between different interpretations of Beethoven's symphonies, they suddenly become vague or admit they're still learning. Second, notice consistency over time. A genuine person maintains their interests and values consistently. A narcissist, in disguise, will start letting the mask slip once they feel they've secured you. David kept up his symphony charade for about 3 months. Then he started finding excuses not to go. He'd complain about being tired, or he'd schedule something else at the same time. Within 6 months of moving in together, he'd stopped pretending entirely and would mock Margaret for wasting time at concerts. Third, observe how they respond when you express interests they supposedly share. A genuine enthusiast will light up with excitement, want to dive deeper into conversation, share their own experiences and perspectives. A faker will show interest, but it's surface level. They're gathering more information about you rather than genuinely engaging with the topic itself. Fourth, watch for what I call interest isolation. A person with genuine passions has them across multiple contexts. They don't just tell you they love hiking, they actually hike. They have hiking gear that shows wear and use. They have stories from multiple hikes, not just rehearsed anecdotes. They have hiking friends they can reference. A narcissist might tell you they love hiking because you mentioned loving it, but their hiking boots look brand new. They can't really discuss trail difficulty or terrain, and they never suggest actually going hiking until you do. The customized perfect partner syndrome is particularly effective on mature women for several reasons. First, you've had enough life experience to know what you want, and you've probably articulated it clearly, whether in a dating profile, in conversations with friends, or in your own mind. This gives the narcissist a clear blueprint to work from. They don't have to guess what will attract you. You've told them, directly or indirectly. Second, mature women are often coming out of long-term relationships where they felt unseen or undervalued. The experience of meeting someone who seems to truly get you, who values exactly what you value, who wants exactly what you want, it's intoxicating. It feels healing. It feels like validation that you weren't crazy for wanting those things in your previous relationship. This emotional vulnerability makes you more susceptible to believing the manufactured persona. Third, you may have internalized some of society's messages about dating at your age. You might worry that there aren't many good options available, that you need to be grateful for finding anyone decent, that you're not in a position to be too picky. These fears make you less likely to question inconsistencies or probe too deeply when something seems too good to be true. You don't want to self-sabotage what feels like your last chance at love. But here's what you need to understand. Real compatibility is built, not discovered fully formed. Yes, you can have genuine shared interests and values with someone, but healthy relationships develop and deepen over time. There's a process of discovery, of learning about each other, of finding common ground and navigating differences. When someone seems perfect immediately, when there's zero friction or adjustment needed, when they claim to love everything you love and want everything you want, that's not fate, that's fabrication. The psychology behind this tactic is rooted in what therapists call idealization, the first phase of the narcissistic relationship cycle. The narcissist needs to secure you quickly and completely. They do this by creating an intense, overwhelming sense of connection and compatibility. They're not actually interested in you as a complex, full human being. They're interested in you as a source of what they need, which might be money, housing, status, or simply narcissistic supply, the admiration and attention that feeds their ego. By becoming your perfect match, they accomplish several goals simultaneously. They bypass your natural defenses and skepticism. They create a sense of obligation. You feel like you owe them your affection because they're being so perfect for you. They establish themselves as irreplaceable, creating the foundation for future control. And they hook you emotionally so deeply that when the mask starts to slip later, you'll make excuses for them because you'll be desperately trying to get back to that perfect person you first met. So what do you do if you're currently experiencing this? How do you test whether this perfect compatibility is real or manufactured? Start by having conversations about topics you've never discussed before. Bring up something you're interested in that you haven't mentioned previously, and watch how they respond. A genuine partner will show curiosity about this new aspect of you. A narcissist in disguise will either quickly claim they also love this thing, or they'll dismiss it as unimportant. Pay attention to their life before you. Do they have long-term friendships that they maintain? Do their interests and hobbies show evidence of sustained engagement over years? Do their stories about themselves remain consistent? Or do you start noticing contradictions? A manufactured persona often has plot holes that start to show up if you pay attention. Introduce them to people who know you well. Your close friends and family members have observed your patterns and preferences over years. They can often spot a fake more easily than you can because they're not under the spell of romantic attraction. If your trusted people express concern that this person seems too agreeable or that something feels off, listen to them. Take your time. A narcissist wants to rush intimacy and commitment. They want to lock you in before you have time to see behind the mask. Resist love bombing, the overwhelming shower of attention, affection, and perfect behavior. Insist on a reasonable pace. Watch what happens. A genuine person will respect your boundaries. A narcissist will push back, making you feel like you're sabotaging the relationship by not moving fast enough. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is. That doesn't mean you have to be cynical or closed off. It means you need to balance hope with healthy skepticism, remaining open to love while also protecting yourself with wisdom. The customized perfect partner syndrome is just the first sign we're going to explore, but it's often the foundation for everything else that follows. Because once a narcissist has hooked you with this illusion of perfect compatibility, they can begin implementing the more subtle tactics of control and manipulation that you might not notice until it's too late. Remember, a real relationship involves two authentic people learning about each other, making adjustments, navigating differences, and building something together over time. It's not about one person transforming themselves into exactly what the other person wants. That's not love, that's a con. The selective vulnerability trap. The second sign that you're dating a narcissist in disguise is something that can be incredibly convincing because it seems like the opposite of narcissistic behavior. It's what we call the selective vulnerability trap, and it's one of the most emotionally manipulative tactics in their playbook. Traditional narcissists are known for never admitting weakness, never apologizing, never showing vulnerability. But the narcissist in disguise has learned that this approach doesn't work well, especially with mature, emotionally intelligent women who value emotional depth and authenticity. So they've adapted. They show vulnerability, but in a very specific, calculated way, designed to achieve particular outcomes. Here's how it works. Early in the relationship, they share something deeply personal with you. Maybe they tell you about a painful childhood experience. Perhaps they open up about a past betrayal. They might reveal fears or insecurities. They cry. They show emotion. They let you see them in what appears to be an unguarded, authentic moment, and it creates an incredibly powerful bond. You feel honored that they trust you with this information. You feel needed because they're showing you their wounds. You feel special because they're letting you past their defenses. This vulnerability makes you feel closer to them than you felt to anyone in years. You think, this is what emotional intimacy looks like. This is a man who's done his inner work. This is someone who can be real with me. But here's the key difference between authentic vulnerability and the selective vulnerability trap. Authentic vulnerability is consistent, appropriate to the stage of the relationship, leads to genuine emotional growth, and doesn't come with strings attached. The selective vulnerability trap is strategic, designed to achieve specific manipulation goals, doesn't lead to real change or growth, and always comes with hidden expectations. Let me break this down further. When a narcissist in disguise shows vulnerability, they're doing it for one or more of the following reasons: to create a trauma bond that makes you feel responsible for their emotional well-being, to excuse future bad behavior by establishing a backstory, to position themselves as the victim in their life story so you'll be less likely to hold them accountable, to create emotional debt where you feel you owe them extra understanding and patience, or to distract from their actual concerning behaviors by presenting themselves as wounded and in need of compassion. The timing of this vulnerability is crucial. It often comes early, sometimes even on the first or second date. This violates the normal progression of emotional intimacy, where people gradually reveal more vulnerable aspects of themselves as trust is earned over time. When someone shares their deepest wounds with you before they really know you, that's not brave honesty, that's strategic manipulation. Let me give you an example. Patricia, la 58-year-old widow, met Richard at a grief support group. Patricia's husband had died 2 years prior after a long illness, and she'd been taking time to heal before considering dating. Richard approached her after a meeting, and they went for coffee. During that first coffee, Richard opened up about his own loss. He told Patricia that his wife had left him 3 years ago without warning, taking their children and cleaning out their bank account. He cried as he described the betrayal. He talked about how hard it had been to trust anyone since then. He said that meeting Patricia felt like the first time he'd felt safe enough to be vulnerable since that devastating experience. Patricia was deeply moved. She saw Richard's tears and pain as evidence of his emotional depth. She felt compassion for what he'd been through. She appreciated his willingness to be vulnerable with her. It created an instant sense of intimacy and connection. She thought she'd met a man who truly understood pain and loss, someone who could share that deep emotional space with her. Over the next few months, whenever Richard did something that concerned Patricia, he'd invoke his painful past. When he asked to borrow money just a few weeks into dating, he explained that his ex-wife's betrayal had left him in a difficult financial situation and he was still recovering. When he wanted to move in with Patricia after only 2 months, he said he was tired of being alone and his ex had taken his house, leaving him in a situation he was desperate to escape. When Patricia tried to set boundaries, he'd become emotional about how his ex-wife's abandonment made it hard for him to trust, and he needed extra reassurance that Patricia wouldn't hurt him too. Patricia found herself making exceptions she'd never planned to make. She lent him money. She let him move in. She tolerated behaviors that made her uncomfortable because she felt responsible for his healing. His vulnerability had become a weapon used to control her decisions and override her better judgment. Here's the crucial part. Authentic vulnerability leads to growth and change. When someone genuinely works through their trauma, you see them developing healthier patterns over time. They go to therapy. They do the work. They show progress. The selective vulnerability trap involves sharing the pain, but never actually doing anything to heal it. The wound is kept open and raw because it's useful. It's their excuse, their get-out-of-jail-free card, their trump card to play whenever they need to manipulate your sympathy. Now let's talk about why this tactic is so effective on mature women. You've lived long enough to have your own wounds. You understand pain. You know what it's like to struggle. You've probably done significant emotional work on yourself. Therapy, self-help books, healing practices. This makes you compassionate toward others who are hurting. You want to be understanding. You don't want to be judgmental or dismissive of someone's pain. Additionally, mature women are often socialized to be caretakers. You've spent decades taking care of others, children, aging parents, partners, friends. When someone presents themselves as wounded, your instinct is to nurture and heal. The narcissist in disguise exploits this generous impulse. There's also a dynamic that can occur with women who are recently widowed or divorced. You might feel guilty about moving on and finding happiness. When you encounter someone who seems to be in pain, being the person who helps them feel better can actually alleviate your own guilt. You're not just selfishly pursuing your own happiness, you're helping another wounded soul. This makes the new relationship feel more justified and noble. So how do you distinguish between authentic vulnerability and the selective vulnerability trap? Here are the critical markers to watch for. First, timing and context. Authentic vulnerability happens gradually, appropriate to the level of intimacy that's been established. If someone is sharing their deepest traumas on a first date or very early in getting to know you, that's a red flag. Real emotional intimacy takes time to develop. Someone who's genuinely healthy doesn't use their most painful experiences as an opening gambit. Second, reciprocity and boundaries. Authentic vulnerability involves respecting the other person's boundaries and emotional capacity. A healthy person will share something, but they'll also check in with you. They'll ask if you're comfortable with this level of disclosure. They'll be aware that their pain isn't your responsibility to fix. The selective vulnerability trap involves dumping trauma on you without regard for your boundaries and then expecting you to manage their emotions. Third, accountability versus victimhood. This is perhaps the most important distinction. When someone with authentic vulnerability talks about their past pain, they take some accountability. They might say, "My previous relationship ended badly, and I can see now that I had poor communication skills I needed to work on. They see themselves as an active participant in their life story, not just a victim of other people's actions. The narcissist in disguise tells a story where they are purely a victim, where everything bad that's happened to them was someone else's fault, where they bear no responsibility for any of their relationship failures or life problems. Fourth, emotional progress. Watch what happens with their vulnerability over time. Does it lead to healing, growth, and positive change, or is it static, used repeatedly as an excuse, but never actually addressed? Patricia noticed that Richard told the same story about his ex-wife's betrayal over and over, always with the same level of emotion. Even a year into their relationship, he never seemed to process it or move past it. That's because it wasn't a wound he wanted to heal. It was a tool he wanted to keep using. Fifth, proportionality of response. When you set a boundary or express a need, how do they respond? Someone with authentic vulnerability will try to work with you, even if it's hard. The narcissist in disguise will use their past pain to shut down your needs. They'll make it about how your boundary triggers their trauma, how your request reminds them of their abuser, how you're hurting them by having needs of your own. Sixth, therapeutic engagement. Are they actually doing the work to heal? Are they in therapy? Are they reading books about trauma recovery? Are they practicing new behaviors and coping skills? Or do they just talk about their pain but take no action to address it? Someone who's genuinely working through trauma shows evidence of that work. Let me give you another example to illustrate the difference. Helen, a 64-year-old retired nurse, dated two men around the same time. Michael told her on their third date about his struggle with alcoholism in his 30s and how it had destroyed his first marriage. He explained that he'd been sober for 20 years through AA, that he went to meetings regularly, and that he'd done extensive work to understand and address the issues that had led to his drinking. He shared this with Helen because they were planning to attend a wine tasting event, and he wanted to be upfront about why he wouldn't be drinking. Robert, the other man Helen was seeing, also brought up a difficult past. On their first date, he told Helen about his ex-wife's affairs and how devastated he'd been. He cried, describing it. Throughout their dating, whenever Helen tried to discuss her needs or concerns, Robert would become emotional about how his ex-wife's betrayal made it hard for him to trust. He never went to therapy. He never showed signs of healing. He used his pain as a reason why Helen needed to be extra accommodating, extra understanding, extra willing to prove herself. Helen noticed the difference. Michael's vulnerability was healthy. It was about informing her of something relevant. It showed personal responsibility and growth, and it didn't come with expectations of special treatment. Robert's vulnerability was manipulative. It was premature and oversharing. It positioned him purely as a victim, and it was used to control Helen's behavior and override her boundaries. The selective vulnerability trap is insidious because it hijacks your compassion. It makes you feel like you're being cold or unsupportive if you don't accommodate behavior that's actually harmful to you. It creates a dynamic where their pain always trumps your needs, their trauma always excuses their behavior, their healing always becomes your responsibility. And here's something crucial that mature women need to understand. Someone's pain, no matter how real or severe, doesn't obligate you to accept unacceptable behavior. You can have compassion for someone's wounds while still maintaining boundaries. You can acknowledge their struggle while still requiring that they treat you well. You can want them to heal while recognizing that you're not responsible for fixing them. Real love isn't about rescuing someone from their pain. Real love is about two whole people choosing to walk alongside each other, supporting each other's growth while each person does their own work. When someone uses their vulnerability as a manipulation tactic, they're not actually interested in healing or growing. They're interested in controlling you through your sympathy. If you're currently in a relationship where the person's vulnerability has become a weapon, where your compassion is being exploited, where their pain is consistently used to override your needs and boundaries. You're likely dealing with the selective vulnerability trap, and it's time to step back and reassess whether this relationship is actually serving your well-being, or whether you've been trapped in a dynamic of emotional manipulation disguised as intimacy. Side 3. The gradual boundary erosion, the third sign. You're dating a narcissist in disguise is something that happens so slowly, so subtly, that you often don't realize it's happening until you wake up one day and don't recognize your own life anymore. We call it gradual boundary erosion, and it's one of the most dangerous tactics because of how invisible it is in the moment. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your sense of self, your autonomy, your values, your time, your energy, and your resources. Healthy relationships respect boundaries. Partners discuss them, negotiate them when needed, and honor them, even when it's inconvenient. But narcissists, even the ones in disguise, fundamentally don't believe your boundaries matter. They believe their needs and wants should always take priority. The sophisticated narcissist doesn't attack your boundaries directly because that would trigger your defenses. Instead, they erode them gradually, like water wearing away stone. Here's how this process typically unfolds. At first, they respect your boundaries, or at least appear to. You tell them you need time alone sometimes, and they say, of course, they understand. You mention that you're not comfortable lending money to people you're dating, and they completely agree with that policy. You explain that you have commitments on certain days, and they say they respect your schedule. In the beginning, they seem like the most understanding, flexible partner you've ever had. But then, little by little, they start testing those boundaries. It starts small. You said you needed Tuesday evenings alone, but they show up with takeout, saying they just wanted to see you for a minute. You told them you don't lend money to dating partners, but they ask to borrow $20 for gas, which seems harmless enough. You explained you have book club every Thursday, but they schedule something and seem disappointed when you can't cancel. Each individual boundary crossing seems minor. They have good reasons, reasonable explanations. They frame it as spontaneous romance, or genuine need, or wanting to share something special with you. If you object, they make you feel like you're being rigid, cold, or unreasonable. They say things like, "I thought you wanted to spend time together," or "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," or "I guess I misunderstood how flexible you were willing to be." The crucial tactic here is that they make you question your own boundaries. Are you being too rigid? Are you holding on to rules from your past that don't serve you anymore? Are you being closed off and preventing the relationship from deepening? They plant these doubts in your mind, and gradually you start relaxing your boundaries yourself. You tell yourself you're being more open, more flexible, more relationship-focused. You don't realize you're actually being manipulated into abandoning your self-protection. Let me tell you about Diane, a 60-year-old financial advisor. When Diane met Thomas, she had clear boundaries, established from her previous relationships. She valued her independence. She had her own home that she'd worked hard to buy. She had Wednesday nights with her sister, Saturday mornings at the gym, and Sunday afternoons volunteering at an animal shelter. She'd learned from past relationships that she needed this structure to maintain her sense of self. Thomas seemed completely supportive. He told Diane he loved that she was independent. He said he admired her commitment to her activities and relationships. He assured her he wasn't the kind of man who would try to monopolize her time. But 6 months in, Diane's life looked completely different. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when or how it had happened, but Thomas was now at her house almost every night. He'd gradually brought over more and more belongings until he was essentially living there, though they'd never discussed him moving in. Her Wednesday nights with her sister had been reduced to occasional phone calls because Thomas would schedule things on Wednesdays, and Diane didn't want to seem inflexible. She was still going to the gym on Saturday mornings, but Thomas had started coming with her, which meant she couldn't have her usual contemplative time that had been so important to her mental health. And her Sunday volunteering had become sporadic because Thomas didn't like being alone on weekends and would make her feel guilty about leaving him. When Diane's sister pointed out these changes, Diane found herself defending Thomas. He wasn't controlling, she insisted. She was choosing to spend more time with him. She was choosing to be more flexible. But when her sister asked, "Are you happy with these changes? Did you consciously decide to reshape your life this way?" Diane realized the answer was no. She'd been gradually giving ground, responding to pressure and guilt, until she'd lost most of what had made her feel like herself. This is the insidious nature of gradual boundary erosion. It happens in such small increments that each individual step doesn't trigger alarm. It's like the metaphor of the frog in boiling water. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it will immediately jump out. But if you put a frog in room temperature water and gradually heat it, the frog won't notice the temperature rising until it's too late. The narcissist in disguise uses several specific tactics to erode your boundaries. Let's break them down so you can recognize them. First, there's the emergency excuse. They violate a boundary but frame it as an exception due to unusual circumstances. They needed to see you on your alone night because they had a crisis. They needed to borrow money despite your policy because of an unexpected expense. The problem is, with a narcissist, there's always a crisis. The exception becomes the rule. But because each instance is presented as a one-time emergency, you don't recognize the pattern. Second, there's emotional manipulation. When you try to maintain a boundary, they respond with hurt feelings. They act wounded that you won't make an exception for them. They say things that make you feel selfish or uncaring for maintaining your limits. "I guess I'm not as important to you as your book club. I can't believe you won't help me out when I really need you. If you really loved me, you'd want to see me even on your alone nights." Third, there's the slow normalize. They don't ask to completely eliminate a boundary. They just ask for small modifications, which they gradually expand. "Can I come over on your alone night just this once?" becomes, "Can I stop by for a few minutes on your alone nights?" which becomes, "I'll just be at your place on your alone nights doing my own thing. I won't bother you," which becomes, "What's the point of alone nights when we're in a relationship?" Fourth, there's comparative minimization. They make your boundaries seem silly or excessive by comparing them to what other people supposedly do. Most couples spend every night together. "My friends think it's weird that you need so much alone time. Normal people don't have these kinds of restrictions in relationships." This social comparison makes you doubt whether your boundaries are reasonable. Fifth, there's the relationship escalation pressure. They frame boundary erosion as a natural part of deepening intimacy. "Don't you think we're past the point of having separate lives? I thought we were building something serious here. If you're not willing to be more flexible, maybe you're not ready for a committed relationship." This makes you feel like maintaining boundaries is somehow incompatible with relationship progression. Sixth, there's memory revision. Once they've successfully crossed a boundary multiple times, they start acting like the boundary never existed. You remind them that you said you needed Tuesday nights alone, and they look confused. They say, "I don't remember you saying that," or "You said that when we first met, but I thought things had changed," or "You never said it was a hard rule." The reason gradual boundary erosion is particularly effective on mature women is multi-layered. First, you've been taught your entire life to be accommodating, flexible, and relationship-focused. Women of your generation were often socialized to believe that maintaining strong boundaries makes you selfish or difficult. Being a good partner meant being flexible and putting the relationship first. The narcissist exploits this conditioning. Second, you may have spent decades in a long-term relationship where boundaries naturally became more fluid over time. With a healthy partner, this fluidity is mutual and consensual. You both make space for each other in ways that feel good to both of you. But when you're newly dating, you might not remember or recognize that this fluidity should develop organically over years, not weeks or months. The narcissist rushes this process, creating false intimacy by rapidly demolishing the normal boundaries that exist early in dating. Third, you might be worried about seeming too demanding or high maintenance. You've heard the cultural narratives about older women being set in their ways or unwilling to compromise. You don't want to fulfill that stereotype. So when the narcissist pushes against your boundaries and suggests you're being inflexible, it triggers your fear that maybe you are too rigid, too stuck, too unwilling to adapt. You overcompensate by being more flexible than is actually healthy. Fourth, if you're coming out of a relationship where you felt controlled or restricted, having someone who seems to want to be with you all the time can initially feel validating rather than concerning. You might mistake constant presence for devotion and interpret boundary crossing as eagerness rather than control. You think, finally, someone who actually wants to be with me, not recognizing that what they actually want is to absorb you into their orbit. So how do you identify gradual boundary erosion when you're in the middle of it? Here are the warning signs to watch for. Check in with your life structure. Compare your daily routine, weekly activities, relationships with friends and family, financial situation, and living situation now versus when you started dating this person. Have things changed significantly? Did you consciously choose those changes, or did they happen gradually in response to pressure? Notice your justifications. Are you frequently explaining or defending your partner's need to be present in areas of your life where you originally wanted independence? Are you telling yourself and others that you're choosing to be more flexible when it doesn't actually feel like a choice? Are you making excuses for why your original boundaries don't apply anymore? Pay attention to your emotional state. Do you feel resentful but suppress it? Do you miss aspects of your life that you've given up? Do you feel guilty for wanting time alone or with other people? Do you feel like you're constantly negotiating for basic autonomy? These feelings indicate that boundaries are being violated, even if you can't articulate exactly how. Observe the pattern of exceptions. Is there always a reason why your boundaries need to be flexible right now? Do the exceptions keep piling up until there's no boundary left? Does saying no lead to conflict, coldness, or emotional manipulation? Watch for the guilt trip. When you try to maintain a boundary, what happens? A healthy partner might be disappointed but will ultimately respect your limits. A narcissist will make you feel terrible for having limits at all. They'll act hurt, angry, confused, or wounded. They'll question your commitment to the relationship. They'll make you work to prove you care by violating your own boundaries. Check for the progression of asks. Are they asking for increasingly larger violations of your boundaries over time? Did it start with small things and graduate to major things? This graduation is a hallmark of gradual boundary erosion. If you've identified that gradual boundary erosion is happening in your relationship, here's what you need to do. First, reconnect with your original boundaries. Write them down. Remember why they were important to you. Don't let anyone convince you that having boundaries makes you difficult or uncommitted. Boundaries are essential to healthy relationships. Second, reassert your boundaries clearly. Yes, this will be uncomfortable, especially if they've been eroded for a while. But you need to tell your partner, I realize I've let some of my boundaries slip and I need to re-establish them. Then clearly state what those boundaries are. Third, watch their response carefully. This is diagnostic. A healthy partner will hear you, might be disappointed, but will work with you to respect your boundaries. A narcissist will react badly. They'll tell you you're changing. They'll say you're being unreasonable. They'll threaten the relationship. They'll double down on the guilt trips and manipulation. Their response will tell you everything you need to know. Fourth, be prepared to end the relationship if they won't respect your boundaries. This is hard, especially if you've invested time and emotion. But here's the truth. A relationship where you can't maintain basic boundaries is a relationship that will damage you over time. Your boundaries exist to protect your well-being. Someone who consistently violates them doesn't have your well-being at heart. Remember, you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not required to dissolve your sense of self to make space for someone else. You are not being difficult or high maintenance by having boundaries. You're being healthy. Gradual boundary erosion is a tactic designed to leave you hollowed out, having given away piece after piece of yourself until there's nothing left but what serves the narcissist. Don't let it happen. Recognize it, name it, and protect yourself. Sign 4. The strategic competence-incompetence swap. The fourth sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is something that can leave you feeling confused and gaslit because it seems to defy logic. We call it the strategic competence-incompetence swap. And once you understand this pattern, you'll see it everywhere. Here's the phenomenon. Your partner demonstrates clear competence in certain areas of life. They manage complex work projects. They handle intricate financial matters for themselves. They organize events with friends. They maintain their car, navigate technology, manage their health appointments. They're obviously capable adults who can function effectively in the world. But when it comes to tasks that serve the relationship or your needs, suddenly they become mysteriously incompetent. They can't figure out how to load the dishwasher correctly. They don't know how to make a simple dinner. They can't remember to pick up items from the store. They struggle with basic household tasks. They forget important dates. They can't manage to call the plumber or schedule an appointment. It's baffling because you've seen them handle much more complex tasks in other contexts, yet they claim they just can't manage these relatively simple things. This isn't actual incompetence. This is strategic incompetence, a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately performs tasks poorly or claims inability so that you'll stop asking them to do those tasks and will do everything yourself instead. And it's devastatingly effective because it's hard to prove. If you accuse them of deliberately being incompetent, they'll act hurt and say they were really trying their best. If you try to teach them, they'll go through the motions but continue to do it wrong. Eventually, it becomes easier for you to just do everything yourself, which is exactly what they want. Let me introduce you to Linda, a 56-year-old architect. Linda met Frank at an art gallery. Frank was impressive. He ran his own consulting business, traveled internationally for work, and managed multiple client relationships simultaneously. He clearly had organizational skills, professional competence, and the ability to handle complex logistical challenges. They started dating, and at first, Frank was helpful and involved. But once they became more serious, a pattern emerged. When Linda asked Frank to help plan a weekend trip, he'd make reservations at the wrong hotel or book the wrong dates, forcing Linda to fix it. When they decided to cook together, Frank would burn the food or drastically oversalt it, leading Linda to take over cooking. When Linda asked him to call about a repair needed at her house, he'd forget to call, or he'd call but supposedly not get through, or he'd leave a message but report the information incorrectly, leading Linda to have to call herself. At first, Linda made excuses. Maybe he's not domestic. Maybe he's not good at planning personal trips like he is at planning work, travel. Maybe he's stressed and forgetting things. But then Linda went to one of Frank's work events and watched him flawlessly orchestrate a complex client dinner involving dietary restrictions, timing, coordination, and social dynamics that required significant attention to detail. She realized he was absolutely capable. He just strategically deployed that capability only when it served him. The strategic competence-incompetence swap serves several purposes for the narcissist. First, it trains you to stop having expectations. You learn that asking them to do things results in it being done wrong, forgotten, or becoming a bigger problem than if you'd done it yourself. So, you stop asking. They've successfully trained you to not burden them with responsibilities. Second, it positions them as the victim. They're not refusing to help, they're just not good at these things. They tried. It's not their fault. They're not domestic or organized or good at remembering. This makes it hard for you to be angry with them because they can frame your frustration as you being mean to them about their limitations. Third, it keeps you in a service role. By ensuring you have to handle most of the practical aspects of life and the relationship, they keep you busy, tired, and focused on managing logistics rather than noticing larger problems in the relationship. You're so exhausted from doing everything that you don't have energy to step back and question the dynamic. Fourth, it prevents true partnership. A healthy relationship involves both people contributing to the practical tasks of building a life together. By opting out through strategic incompetence, they ensure the relationship stays unbalanced, with you carrying most of the load. The reason this tactic works especially well on mature women is complex. First, many women in your generation were raised with the expectation that they would handle the domestic sphere. You've been managing households for decades. You're efficient at it. The narcissist exploits your competence, letting you handle everything because you're so good at it. Never mind that everyone is capable of learning these skills if they choose to. Second, you may have spent years in a relationship where you handled most of the domestic and emotional labor. This has become so normalized that you might not immediately recognize it as problematic when it shows up in a new relationship. You think it's just how relationships work, not realizing that it doesn't have to be this way. Third, there's a generational dynamic where many women were taught to believe men aren't naturally good at domestic tasks. He's a man. Of course, he can't cook or clean as well as you can. This is nonsense, of course. Men are perfectly capable of learning these skills. But this cultural narrative gives narcissists cover for their strategic incompetence. They're not being manipulative, they're just exhibiting typical male domestic helplessness. Except this. Same man can prepare a perfect barbecue for his friends or organize a camping trip with complex logistics. His incompetence is surprisingly selective. Fourth, if you're someone who takes pride in being capable and getting things done efficiently, the narcissist will appeal to that identity. They'll compliment you on how amazing you are at handling everything. They'll tell you you're so much better at these things than they are. They'll frame their incompetence as admiration for your competence. And because it feels good to be seen as capable, you might not immediately recognize that you're being manipulated into doing everything. So, how do you identify the strategic competence-incompetence swap? Here are the patterns to watch for. Selective competence. They can handle complex tasks in areas that serve them or that they care about, but suddenly become helpless with tasks that serve the relationship or your needs. This disparity is the red flag. Everyone has genuine strengths and weaknesses. But genuine incompetence is consistent across contexts, not mysteriously selective. Convenient forgetfulness. They forget things that would require them to do something for you or the relationship, but they never forget things that are important to them. They forget your anniversary but never forget a sporting event. They forget to pay a shared bill, but never forget to pay their personal bills. Learned helplessness. They claim they just aren't good at certain things and never make any effort to learn or improve. We live in an age where you can learn almost anything from YouTube videos, yet they never watch a tutorial on how to do the thing they claim they can't do. Their helplessness is a choice, weaponized incompetence. They do tasks so poorly that it creates more work for you. They wash the clothes wrong, shrinking your favorite sweater. They clean the bathroom, but leave it dirtier than before. They cook dinner, but leave the kitchen a disaster. Eventually, you stop asking because it's not worth the hassle. The well-timed breakdown. Things they were previously capable of doing suddenly become impossible at convenient times. They could navigate fine before, but now they get lost every time you need them to drive somewhere. They could cook before, but now they suddenly can't manage basic meals. The timing of their incompetence aligns suspiciously with it serving their interests. Resistance to learning. When you offer to teach them or suggest they learn how to do something, they resist, get defensive, or go through the motions but don't actually improve. This reveals that their incompetence is a choice, not a limitation. Now let's compare this to healthy relationship dynamics to make the distinction clear. In a healthy relationship, both partners have genuine strengths and weaknesses. Maybe one person is better at cooking and the other is better at managing finances. That's normal. But in a healthy relationship, the person who's not as good at something makes an effort to learn and contribute. They don't just opt out entirely. In a healthy relationship, both partners are willing to do tasks they don't particularly enjoy or excel at because they're part of sharing a life together. You might not love doing laundry, but you do your share. Your partner might not enjoy grocery shopping, but they do it when needed. You both recognize that maintaining a life together requires effort from both people. In a healthy relationship, both partners show appreciation for what the other does and try to balance the load. If one person is doing significantly more, the other notices and tries to step up. There's awareness of fairness and equity. Compare this to the strategic competence-incompetence swap, where one person consistently positions themselves as unable to contribute, shows no genuine effort to learn or improve, takes your labor for granted, and resists any suggestions that they should step up. Real-world example, time. Consider Margaret, a 63-year-old retired teacher who dated 2 men within the same year. James genuinely wasn't great at cooking. He'd lived alone for years and mostly ate simple meals. But when he and Margaret started seriously dating, he bought a cookbook. He asked Margaret to teach him a few of her recipes. He watched cooking videos online. He practiced. His meals weren't gourmet, but he consistently prepared dinner 2 nights a week. And over time, he got better. He took ownership of learning a skill that would contribute to their partnership. In contrast, George also claimed he couldn't cook. But unlike James, George never tried to learn. When Margaret suggested he watch a cooking video, he'd say he didn't have time. When Margaret offered to teach him, he'd agree but then get distracted by his phone or do each step incorrectly, despite clear instructions. When Margaret would get frustrated, George would say she was being impatient with him and he was doing his best. After 6 months, he still couldn't prepare even a basic meal. Margaret realized his inability was a choice designed to keep her in the role of service provider. So what do you do if you've identified the strategic competence-incompetence swap in your relationship? Here's your action plan. First, name the pattern. Don't let it continue invisibly. Say to your partner, "I've noticed that you're very capable at complex tasks for work or your own interests, but you claim you can't manage much simpler tasks for our household. I need to understand why that is." Second, set clear expectations. Don't ask if they can do something. Tell them you need them to do it. I need you to call the plumber and schedule a repair. I need you to prepare dinner on Tuesday and Thursday. I need you to manage getting the car serviced. Frame these as requirements of partnership, not optional tasks they can opt out of through incompetence. Third, don't accept learned helplessness. If they say they don't know how, tell them to. Learn. We have the internet. You can figure this out just like you figured out your job responsibilities and your hobbies. Fourth, don't fix their mistakes. If they do something wrong, let the consequence land on them. If they make dinner reservations for the wrong night, they need to deal with fixing it, not you. If they wash the clothes wrong, they need to re-wash them. Stop protecting them from the consequences of their incompetence. Fifth, watch their response to these expectations. A healthy partner who genuinely struggles with certain tasks will appreciate the push to contribute more and will make sincere efforts. A narcissist using strategic incompetence will resist, get defensive, accuse you of being controlling, or threaten the relationship. Their resistance reveals that their incompetence was always a choice. Sixth, be prepared to make hard decisions. If they absolutely refuse to step up and contribute as equal partners, you need to recognize that they've chosen a dynamic where you do all the work and they coast. You can either accept that, which I don't recommend, or you can end the relationship and find someone who actually wants to be a partner, not a dependent. The strategic competence-incompetence swap is degrading because it treats you as a service provider rather than a partner. It keeps you so busy managing practical tasks that you don't have energy to notice you're being exploited. It's a slow theft of your time, energy, and respect. You didn't work hard your whole life to take care of an adult who's perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, but chooses not to. You deserve a partner who contributes equally, who values your time and energy, who wants to build a life with you rather than have you build a life for them. Don't accept strategic incompetence. Demand better. And if they won't deliver, find someone who will. Zygn 5. The subtle financial entanglement. The fifth sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is one that can have devastating long-term consequences, especially for women who've spent years building financial security. We call it the subtle financial entanglement, and it's frightening because it doesn't look like the stereotypical gold digger scenario. It's much more sophisticated, gradual, and difficult to detect until you're already deeply entangled. Let's start with what this doesn't look like. It doesn't look like someone directly asking for large sums of money. It doesn't look like someone who's obviously unemployed targeting you for your assets. It doesn't look like the clear gold digger you've been warned about your entire life. The narcissist in disguise is much smarter than that. They understand that mature, intelligent women can spot an obvious financial predator, so they've developed subtler strategies to access your financial resources while making it seem like something completely different. Here's how the subtle financial entanglement typically unfolds. At first, this person appears financially stable or even successful. They have a job, they pay for dates, they don't ask you for money. They might even seem generous, buying you thoughtful gifts or treating you to nice experiences. You have zero reason to think they're interested in you for financial reasons, but gradually, subtly, they begin weaving themselves into your financial life. It starts small and seems innocent, even romantic. Maybe they suggest moving in together to save money on rent. Maybe they propose combining some expenses since you're spending so much time together anyway. Maybe they hint that it would be easier if you had a joint bank account for shared costs. Each step seems logical, reasonable, even like a natural progression of a committed relationship. Let me tell you about Barbara, a 61-year-old retired civil servant with a pension and a paid-off house. Barbara met Stephen, who presented himself as a successful independent contractor. He had his own business, drove a nice car, dressed well, and never once asked Barbara for money. In fact, he paid for most of their dates and was generous with gifts. Barbara had no concerns about his financial motives. After 6 months of dating, Stephen suggested he stay at Barbara's place more often, since he was driving back and forth so much. Made sense. Then he suggested selling his condo because Barbara's house was larger and in a better location. He'd lived in his place for only 2 years and hadn't built much equity, but he'd put the proceeds into savings for their future. Seemed reasonable. Once Stephen moved in, he suggested they split household expenses 50-50, which Barbara thought was fair. He'd pay his half directly to her since the house and utilities were in her name. But somehow, his payments were often late. He'd had unexpected business expenses. He'd forgotten to transfer the money. He'd need a few more days. Barbara would cover it temporarily, and he'd pay her back, though often he'd forget to actually pay her back and she'd feel petty bringing it up again. Stephen's business started having problems. Contract disputes, clients not paying, economic downturns, always something. He couldn't contribute as much to household expenses anymore. Could Barbara cover things temporarily? It was just until his big contract came through. Barbara agreed, thinking it was what partners did for each other during tough times. 2 years in, Barbara realized Stephen hadn't paid for anything substantial in over a year. He was living in her house, eating her food, using her utilities, driving her car when his needed repairs he couldn't afford. He still claimed he was about to close a big deal that would pay her back everything, but it never materialized. His business was a facade, and she'd been supporting him fully without even realizing when it had happened. This is the insidious nature of subtle financial entanglement. Each step seems reasonable in isolation. Moving in together? Couples do that. Splitting expenses? That's fair. Temporarily covering someone during a tough financial period? That's what love is about. But the narcissist orchestrates these steps deliberately to gradually gain access to your resources while giving less and less themselves. The strategies they use are sophisticated and specific. Let's break down the most common tactics. First, there's the false equivalency setup. They position themselves as financially equal or even superior to you at the beginning. This is crucial because it disarms your defenses. You're not worried about being taken advantage of because they seem to have their own money. But their financial stability is often an illusion created through careful image management, debt you don't know about, or a lifestyle they can't actually sustain. Second, there's the cohabitation rush. They push to move in together relatively quickly, framing it in terms of romance or practicality. It's so silly to maintain 2 places when we're always together. I want to wake up next to you every morning. Why are we paying double rent? Once they're living with you, especially if it's your property, you're covering most of the actual costs, while they nominally contribute much less, if anything. Third, there's the expense creep. Shared costs start small and explode over time. First, it's just splitting dinner costs, then it's groceries, then utilities, then their car breaks down, and can you help? Then they need dental work they can't afford. Then their business needs an investment. The requests grow, but because they happen gradually, you don't notice you've gone from sharing a dinner bill to funding their entire life. Fourth, there's the guilt-based contribution reduction. When they start paying less or nothing, they have ready excuses that make you feel guilty for expecting contribution. They frame it as you being unsupportive during their difficult time, or as you caring more about money than the relationship, or as you not understanding how business works. They position your completely reasonable expectation of financial partnership as you being materialistic or unloving. Fifth, there's the future promise strategy. They always have a big payoff coming soon, a contract about to close, an inheritance in the works, a business deal that's almost finalized. Just a few more months, and they'll be able to pay you back everything and contribute equally. This future promise keeps you invested and prevents you from seeing the pattern clearly. You think you're in a temporary difficult period, not recognizing that the difficult period is permanent. Sixth, there's the asset access escalation. They gradually gain legal or practical access to your financial assets. It starts with a spare key, then mail delivered to your address, then adding them to a utility account for convenience, then maybe a joint credit card for shared expenses, then maybe they convince you to add them to your bank account or even property deed for estate planning purposes. Each step seems reasonable, but it gives them increasing legal claim to your assets. The reason subtle financial entanglement is particularly dangerous for mature women is multifaceted. First, you've worked your whole life to build financial security. You might have a paid-off house, retirement savings, a pension, or investment income. These assets make you a target for financial predators, but your age and appearance of relationship commitment make the predation seem unlikely to you. Second, if you're recently single after a long marriage, you might not have dated in decades. The financial dynamics of modern dating, especially the expectation that some people have about women being financially independent, can be unfamiliar. You might feel uncertain about what's reasonable to expect regarding financial contribution from a partner. Third, many mature women were raised with narratives about supporting your man and standing by your partner during difficult times. The narcissist exploits these values, positioning their financial exploitation as you being a good, supportive partner rather than recognizing you're being used. Fourth, there may be shame about acknowledging you're being financially exploited. You're intelligent and successful. How could you let this happen? This shame makes you less likely to seek help or advice until significant financial damage has occurred. Fifth, you might fear being alone more than being exploited. The thought of starting over in dating at your age might seem daunting. The narcissist knows this and uses it as leverage. You tolerate financial exploitation because you're afraid you won't find anyone else, and they subtly reinforce this fear. Now, let's be clear about the distinction between healthy financial interdependence and subtle financial entanglement. In healthy relationships, couples do share finances to varying degrees. They might split rent, combine some expenses, help each other during genuinely difficult times. So, how do you tell the difference? Healthy financial interdependence is mutual, transparent, equitable over time, and respects individual autonomy. Both people contribute according to their means. Both people have clear understanding of the financial picture. Both people maintain some financial independence. Both people have input into financial decisions. Temporary imbalances are truly temporary and are balanced out over time. Subtle financial entanglement is one-sided, opaque, increasingly inequitable, and erodes your financial autonomy. One person consistently contributes less or nothing. Financial information is unclear or hidden. Imbalances grow rather than resolve. You lose control over your own financial decisions. You're constantly making exceptions to your financial boundaries. Consider this comparison. Sarah, a 62-year-old widow, dated 2 men. Mark was going through a genuinely difficult financial period due to a layoff from his engineering job. He was upfront about his situation. He showed Sarah his severance package details, his job search efforts, his budget. He contributed what he could, even if it was less than half of expenses. He looked for ways to contribute non-financially, doing extra around the house, cooking, managing errands. He landed a new job within 4 months and immediately resumed equal financial contribution. He even paid Sarah back the extra she'd covered, though she said it wasn't necessary. In contrast, Edward was also supposedly going through financial difficulties with his real estate business, but his financial situation was vague. He couldn't show Sarah concrete information about his business. He kept saying things would turn around soon, but never specified how or when. He contributed nothing financially, but also didn't step up in other ways. He continued to spend money on himself, his hobbies, gifts for his kids, eating out with friends, while expecting Sarah to cover all shared expenses. His financial crisis lasted over a year with no improvement. When Sarah pushed for clarity, he became defensive and accused her of being controlling. The difference is obvious when laid out like this, but when you're in it, when emotions are involved, when you're hearing reasons and explanations daily, it's harder to see clearly. So, how do you protect yourself from subtle financial entanglement? Here are concrete strategies. First, maintain financial autonomy regardless of relationship status. Keep your own bank accounts. Keep your own credit cards. Keep your own property in your name only. If you split expenses, use a shared account that you both contribute to equally, but keep your main finances separate. This isn't about lack of trust. It's about maintaining independence and protecting assets you spent a lifetime building. Second, require transparency before any financial interdependence. Before you combine any finances or cover significant expenses for someone, you need to see their full financial picture. Tax returns, bank statements, credit report, debt load. If they refuse to show you this information, don't proceed with financial entanglement. Their privacy concerns don't outweigh your right to make informed decisions about your money. Third, establish clear agreements in writing. If you're going to share housing costs, put it in writing. If they're contributing to your mortgage, have a legal agreement. If you're lending money, have a promissory note. If they're moving into your house, have a cohabitation agreement. This isn't romantic, but it's essential. A real partner who respects you will understand the need to protect your interests. Fourth, set time limits on financial support. If you agree to help someone financially during a difficult period, establish a clear end date and specific conditions. I can cover expenses for 3 months while you get back on your feet. By month 3, I need to see you contributing X amount. Don't let temporary become permanent. Fifth, watch for the warning signs of financial manipulation. Are they vague about their finances? Do they resist showing you documentation? Do their stories about money change or not add up? Are they living beyond what their supposed income could support? Do they have unexplained debts? Do they spend money on themselves while expecting you to cover shared expenses? These red flags indicate someone who shouldn't have access to your finances. Sixth, listen to objective third parties. If your financial advisor, attorney, accountant, or trusted friends express concern about your financial arrangements with a partner, listen. They're not blinded by emotion and can see patterns you might miss. Seventh, regularly audit your financial situation. Every few months, look at how much you're spending on or contributing to the relationship versus your partner. Is it equitable? If not, why not? Is the imbalance temporary and moving toward balance, or is it growing? This regular check-in prevents the gradual drift that characterizes subtle financial entanglement. Eighth, protect your assets legally. Update your will to reflect your wishes. Consider a trust. Make sure your beneficiaries are current. If you're considering marriage, absolutely get a prenuptial agreement. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting assets you worked your entire life to accumulate. If you're currently experiencing subtle financial entanglement, here's what you need to do. First, document everything. Write down what you've spent on or given to this person. Gather receipts, bank statements, anything that shows the financial flow. You need clarity on the scope of the situation. Second, stop the bleeding. Don't give or lend any more money. Don't cover any more expenses beyond what you've explicitly agreed to in writing. Don't believe promises of future repayment. The pattern is clear, and more money won't fix it. Third, have a direct conversation. Tell them you need them to start contributing equally immediately or move out. Be clear. Be firm. Don't accept excuses. Their response will tell you everything you need to know. Fourth, if they won't change or become hostile, get legal help. Consult with an attorney about how to protect your assets and, if necessary, how to remove this person from your home and life. Don't try to handle this alone. Fifth, learn from it. Understand how you got here so you can protect yourself in the future. What red flags did you miss or excuse? What boundaries did you allow to erode? What values or fears did the narcissist exploit? This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about ensuring you don't end up here again. Financial abuse, which is what subtle financial entanglement is, can destroy the security you spent a lifetime building. It can ruin your retirement, jeopardize your housing, damage your credit, and leave you financially vulnerable in your later years. This isn't just about money. It's about your future, your independence, and your safety. Don't let anyone exploit your generosity, your love, or your desire for companionship to steal your financial security. You earned it, protect it, and demand a partner who respects it and contributes equally. Before we continue to the next section, I want to remind you how valuable your engagement is to this channel. If you're finding this information helpful, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or questions, and share it with any friends who might benefit. Your support helps us reach more women who need this message. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our content. And if you want to directly support the work we do, consider sending a super thanks. It makes a real difference in allowing us to continue producing in-depth content like this. Sign 6. The empathy simulation. The sixth sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is perhaps the most psychologically disturbing because it involves the simulation of the very quality that would normally indicate a safe, healthy partner. We call it the empathy simulation, and it's one of the most sophisticated manipulation tactics because it hijacks your trust and sense of emotional safety. True empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. It's what allows us to connect deeply, to feel understood, to know that someone genuinely cares about our well-being. Empathy is foundational to healthy relationships. It's what makes you feel safe being vulnerable, secure that your partner has your best interests at heart, confident that you're seen and valued as a full human being. Narcissists fundamentally lack genuine empathy. It's not that they can't intellectually understand what you're feeling, it's that they don't genuinely care about your feelings, except insofar as those feelings affect them. Your emotional state matters to them only if it impacts what they can get from you. But sophisticated narcissists have learned that showing zero empathy is a red flag that even the most trusting people will notice. So they've developed something chilling: empathy simulation. Empathy simulation is the narcissist's ability to convincingly mimic empathetic responses without actually feeling them. They've studied what empathy looks like. They know what words to say, what expressions to make, what actions to perform. They can deliver an Oscar-worthy performance of caring deeply about your feelings. And because you desperately want to believe they care, because you need the relationship to be safe, you accept the performance as genuine. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. In the early stages of the relationship, the empathy simulation is flawless. When you share something painful from your past, they respond with apparently deep understanding. They say all the right things. They hold you when you cry. They validate your feelings. They make you feel heard and understood in ways you've never experienced before. You think you've finally found someone with emotional depth, someone who truly gets you. But if you pay close attention, you start noticing cracks in the performance. Let me explain what distinguishes real empathy from empathy simulation. Real empathy is automatic, consistent, leads to appropriate action, doesn't require an audience, and costs the empathetic person something emotionally. When someone genuinely empathizes with you, they feel your pain. It affects them. They're moved to help or comfort you because they're sharing your emotional experience. Their empathetic response is consistent whether others are watching or not, and it remains steady even when it's inconvenient for them. Empathy simulation is performative, inconsistent, rarely leads to genuine helpful action, requires witnesses, and costs the narcissist nothing emotionally. They're acting empathetic, not feeling empathetic. So their performance varies in quality depending on circumstances. They show empathy when it serves them, in front of others, or when they need to manipulate you, but it evaporates when there's no benefit to performing it, and they can turn it on and off like a light switch because they're not actually feeling anything. Let me tell you about Gloria, a 59-year-old social worker who specialized in trauma counseling. Gloria was highly attuned to emotional dynamics. She'd spent her career helping people process pain and grief. You'd think she'd be the last person to be fooled by empathy simulation. But that's exactly what happened. Gloria met Raymond at a grief support group. Both had lost spouses to cancer. Raymond seemed deeply emotionally aware. When group members shared their pain, he responded with what appeared to be genuine compassion. He'd tear up hearing their stories. He'd offer thoughtful reflections. He seemed like someone who'd really done the emotional work of grieving. When Raymond and Gloria started dating, his empathy seemed boundless. Gloria shared her struggles with her adult daughter who was going through a divorce. Raymond listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, validated Gloria's concerns. When Gloria was stressed about work, Raymond seemed to truly understand. He'd make her tea, encourage her to talk, offer comfort. But over time, Gloria noticed something odd. Raymond's empathy was most pronounced when they were with other people. At parties or with friends, he was the most attentive, caring partner imaginable. He'd publicly check in on how Gloria was feeling, get her a blanket if she was cold, ask if she needed anything. Everyone commented on what an empathetic, caring man he was. But when they were alone, his empathy was inconsistent at best. If Gloria was upset, Raymond's response depended entirely on how it affected him. If her distress was about something where comforting her would serve his interests, he was empathetic. But if her distress was about him, about something he'd done or not done, his empathy vanished. He'd become defensive, dismissive, or would turn things around to make it about his feelings being hurt by her being upset. Gloria started testing it. She felt guilty doing this, but she needed to understand what she was experiencing. One day, when they were alone, she shared that she was feeling overwhelmed by work stress. Raymond's response was distracted. He said, "That's tough," then went back to watching TV. The next day, she mentioned the same work stress while they were at lunch with friends. Suddenly, Raymond was the picture of concern, talking about how hard Gloria worked, how she deserved support, asking detailed questions about what was stressing her. The difference was stark. This is the pattern of empathy simulation. The narcissist has learned that appearing empathetic is socially valuable. It makes them look good to others. It helps them maintain the facade of being a good partner. It's a tool for manipulation. But when there's no audience and no strategic benefit, the empathy disappears because it was never real to begin with. Let's explore the specific ways empathy simulation manifests and how to distinguish it from genuine empathy. First, there's performative empathy without action. A genuinely empathetic person not only feels your pain, but is moved to help alleviate it in practical ways. If you're stressed, they take tasks off your plate. If you're sad, they make time to be with you. If you're scared, they problem solve with you. Empathy simulation involves saying empathetic things without any follow-through. They'll say, "I understand how hard this is for you," but then do nothing to actually help. Their empathy is all words, no action. Second, there's empathy with an expiration date. In the beginning, they seem endlessly patient with your feelings. But over time, their tolerance for your emotional needs decreases rapidly. They start responding to your distress with annoyance. They tell you to get over it already. They act like your feelings are burdensome. This happens because maintaining the empathy performance is tiring for them, and once they've secured you in the relationship, they see less strategic benefit in continuing the act. Third, there's conditional empathy. Their empathy appears only when you're feeling things they approve of, or when your distress doesn't inconvenience them. You're allowed to be sad about certain things, the things that don't reflect on them or require them to change. But if you're upset about their behavior, suddenly you're too sensitive, overreacting, making mountains out of molehills. Real empathy doesn't work this way. You don't get to decide which of someone's feelings are valid. Fourth, there's empathy competition. When you share your feelings or struggles, they make it about them. You tell them about a difficult day, and they respond by talking about how their day was worse. You share pain from your past, and they tell you about their pain, redirecting the focus back to themselves. Genuine empathy centers the person who's hurting. Empathy simulation can't resist the urge to recenter on the narcissist. Fifth, there's formulaic empathy. Real empathy is responsive to the specific situation and person. Empathy simulation often sounds scripted or generic. They say the same phrases in different situations. That must be so hard for you. I can't imagine how difficult that is. They're delivering lines they've learned, not responding authentically to what you're actually experiencing. If you listen carefully, you'll notice their empathetic responses lack specificity. They're not really engaging with the particulars of what you've shared. After they've been supposedly empathetic to you, they remind you of it later, especially when they want something. Remember how supportive I was when you were dealing with X? Now I need you to do this for me. They keep score. They view their empathy as currency they've invested that you now owe them. Genuine empathy is freely given without expectation of return. Seventh, there's situational empathy failure. This is perhaps the most diagnostic sign. When their empathy would require them to change their behavior or make a sacrifice, it suddenly disappears. You tell them a specific action of theirs hurts you. A genuinely empathetic person will feel badly about hurting you and want to stop doing the hurtful thing. A narcissist using empathy simulation will invalidate your feelings, defend their action, or promise to change but never actually do it. Their empathy can't survive contact with accountability. The reason empathy simulation is particularly dangerous for mature women is that you've learned over your lifetime to trust empathy as an indicator of a good person. You've learned that someone who seems to care deeply about feelings, who appears emotionally aware, who can hold space for pain, is someone safe. The narcissist knows this and weaponizes it. They present themselves as the emotionally available partner you've been looking for, using empathy simulation to gain your trust and bypass your defenses. Additionally, if you're coming out of a relationship where you felt emotionally unseen, encountering someone who seems to see and validate your feelings is powerfully appealing. It feels healing. You don't want to question it because it's giving you something you've been starved of. The narcissist exploits this hunger for emotional validation. There's also a phenomenon where mature women, especially those in helping professions like nursing, teaching, counseling, or social work, are particularly vulnerable to empathy simulation because they're primed to see and respond to others' pain. They're used to being in the position of providing empathy. When someone seems to empathize with them, it feels special and rare. They may not examine it as critically as they should because they're so grateful for it. So, how do you test whether someone's empathy is genuine or simulated? Here are specific methods. First, observe their empathy when it's inconvenient for them. Are they empathetic to your feelings even when those feelings are about them and their behavior? Do they show empathy when you're upset at a time that's inconvenient for them? Can they put their own needs aside temporarily to tend to yours? If their empathy only appears when it costs them nothing, it's not real. Second, watch for consistency across contexts. Are they equally empathetic in private as they are in public? Do they show the same level of emotional attunement whether or not there's an audience? Real empathy doesn't vary based on who's watching. Third, track whether empathy leads to behavioral change. When you express that something hurts you, do they actually stop doing it? Or do they say empathetic things but continue the hurtful behavior? Genuine empathy naturally leads to wanting to not cause harm. Simulated empathy is just words. Fourth, notice their response to others' pain. How do they respond when someone else, not you, is in distress? Are they empathetic to a struggling family member, a friend going through a hard time, a stranger who needs help? Or is their empathy reserved only for situations where it benefits them? Genuine empathy is a trait that manifests broadly. Simulated empathy is strategically deployed. Fifth, test empathy under stress. How do they respond to your feelings when they're stressed, tired, or dealing with their own problems? Can they maintain empathy even when they're not at their best? Real empathy is somewhat resilient to stress because it's rooted in genuine care. Simulated empathy crumbles under pressure because it requires effort they're unwilling to expend when things are hard for them. Sixth, observe their empathy toward people who can't benefit them. Are they kind to service workers, compassionate to homeless people, patient with elderly folks who are slow? Or is their empathy reserved for people they're trying to impress or extract something from? Genuine empathy extends to all people. Simulated empathy is transactional. If you've identified that you're dealing with empathy simulation rather than genuine empathy, this is a critical discovery. Empathy is foundational to a healthy relationship. You cannot build real intimacy with someone who doesn't genuinely care about your feelings. You cannot be vulnerable with someone whose empathy is a performance designed to manipulate you. You cannot trust someone who's simulating care rather than feeling it. Here's what you need to understand. Empathy simulation is not something that improves over time. The narcissist isn't going to develop real empathy through your love or patience. They're neurologically and psychologically structured in a way that prevents genuine empathy. All you'll accomplish by staying is teaching them to better simulate empathy, to more effectively manipulate you. The appropriate response to discovering empathy simulation is to end the relationship. I know that's difficult to hear. I know you've invested time and emotion. I know you want to believe it can change. But someone who's simulating empathy is fundamentally unsafe. They will hurt you without genuine remorse. They will exploit your vulnerabilities. They will never truly see or value you as a full human being, with feelings that matter independently of how those feelings affect them. You deserve real empathy. You deserve a partner who genuinely cares when you're hurting, who feels moved to help you, who considers your feelings even when it's inconvenient for them. That person exists. But the narcissist simulating empathy is not that person and never will be. Sign 7. The isolation by inches. The seventh sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is one that can leave you feeling utterly alone even while you're in a relationship. We call it isolation by inches, and it's one of the most psychologically damaging tactics because it slowly cuts you off from your support system while making it seem like natural relationship progression. Isolation is a classic abuse tactic. In its obvious form, an abuser directly forbids contact with friends and family, monitors communications, creates scenes when you want to see others, or explicitly demands you stop maintaining outside relationships. Most mature, intelligent women would recognize these behaviors as red flags and would end the relationship immediately. But the narcissist in disguise understands this. They've adapted. They don't overtly forbid you from seeing people. They don't make dramatic ultimatums about choosing between them and your friends. They don't lock you in the house. Instead, they employ subtle, incremental tactics that gradually separate you from your support system while appearing reasonable, supportive, or even concerned about you. The process is so gradual that you don't notice it's happening until you look up one day and realize you barely talk to your friends anymore. You've stopped going to your regular activities. You've pulled away from family members, and the narcissist has become your entire social world. And the terrifying part, you can't point to a single moment where they explicitly stopped you from seeing anyone. You made all these choices yourself. Except they weren't really choices. They were the predictable result of systematic manipulation. Let me tell you about Judith, a 63-year-old librarian with a rich social life. Judith had close friends she'd known for decades, a book club she attended religiously, a sister she talked to almost daily, and adult children she saw regularly. She was socially connected and valued these relationships deeply. When Judith met Carl, he seemed to love how social she was. He'd say things like, "I love that you have such strong friendships, and it's wonderful that you're so close to your family." He never suggested she should see these people less. In fact, he seemed supportive and even joined her for some social events. But there were subtle things. When Judith would mention plans to see her friends, Carl wouldn't object. But he'd look a bit sad. When she'd ask what was wrong, he'd say, "Oh, nothing. I just thought we could spend that time together. But of course, you should go. I'll be fine here alone." The guilt was subtle but effective. When Judith would come home from time with friends, Carl would ask very detailed questions about what they discussed. He framed it as interest, wanting to hear about her evening, but Judith noticed he'd sometimes make slightly negative comments. "Did Susan really say that? That seems judgmental. I think your friends don't understand you the way I do." It made Judith defensive of her friends at first. But over time, she started questioning her friendships herself. Were they judgmental? Did they understand her? Carl also developed a pattern of creating small crises around Judith's social commitments. It was never anything big enough to ask her to cancel outright. But the day of her book club, his back would hurt and he'd really appreciate her help with something. The morning she planned to visit her sister, he'd seem particularly needy or would have scheduled something for them that he'd claim he forgot about. He wouldn't forbid her to go. He'd just create guilt and obligation that made it harder and harder for Judith to prioritize her other relationships. Gradually, Judith saw her friends less. She started canceling on them more often. When they expressed concern, she got defensive because she felt like she was making her own choices. Her friends started reaching out less because she was consistently unavailable. Her relationship with her sister became strained. Her adult children started to worry about her, but felt pushed away when they tried to express concern. 3 years into the relationship, Judith looked around and realized she was isolated. Her friendships had withered. She was mildly estranged from family members. She'd stopped going to book club. Carl was her primary, almost sole source of social connection, and she couldn't articulate a single thing he'd done to cause it. He'd never told her not to see anyone. He'd just made it emotionally easier not to. This is isolation by inches. Let me break down the specific tactics narcissists use to achieve this insidious separation. First, there's subtle disapproval. They never say, "Don't see your friend." They just make negative comments. "Your friend talks about herself a lot, doesn't she? I noticed your brother was drinking quite a bit at dinner. Your daughter seemed stressed. Is she always like that?" They plant seeds of doubt about the people you care about. Over time, these comments affect how you see these people. You start noticing the flaws the narcissist has pointed out. You start feeling less enthusiastic about spending time with them. Second, there's strategic scheduling conflicts. They regularly schedule things during your existing commitments. It's never intentional, "They forgot," or "This was the only time available," or "They thought you'd want to prioritize this." But it forces you to choose between them and your other relationships. And when you choose your other relationships, they make you feel guilty or create consequences that train you to choose them next time. Third, there's the sulk and guilt. When you go out with others, they subtly punish you. They're withdrawn when you get home. They don't ask about your evening or seem interested. They mention how lonely they were or how they could have really used your help with something. They don't directly say you shouldn't have gone, but the emotional message is clear. Your absence caused them suffering. Fourth, there's manufactured crisis. They have urgent needs that somehow always coincide with your plans with others. They need you to help with something. They're not feeling well. They're having a crisis at work. They need to talk about something important. If you postpone seeing them to keep your other commitment, the crisis escalates or they act hurt, that you're not there for them when they need you. Fifth, there's monopolizing recovery time. After you spend time with others, they need extensive time with you to reconnect. You can't just come home from seeing friends and go about your evening. They need to debrief, to spend quality time together, to make up for the time you were apart. This makes the cognitive and emotional cost of seeing others very high. You need to bank hours of time to make up for a 2-hour coffee with a friend. Eventually, it doesn't seem worth it. Sixth, there's criticism escalation. The subtle criticisms of your friends and family become less subtle over time. They express concern that these people are taking advantage of you, giving you bad advice, don't really care about you, are jealous of your relationship, are trying to create problems between you. They position themselves as the only person who truly has your best interests at heart, while everyone else is suspect. Seventh, there's invasive involvement. When you do see others, they insist on coming along or being involved in some way. They want to meet your friends, join your activities, be included in family events. It's framed as wanting to be part of your life, but the effect is that you never have space with your support system without the narcissist's presence. Your friends and family can't express concerns about the relationship to you because the narcissist is always there. Eighth, there's the comparison trap. They compare the time you spend with them versus with others and make you feel like your priorities are wrong. We barely spend time together anymore because you're always with your friends. I gave up so much to be with you, but you're not willing to prioritize our relationship. The comparisons are designed to make you feel like maintaining outside relationships means you're failing at the romantic relationship. The reason isolation by inches, particularly effective on mature women, is multi-layered. First, you may have already experienced natural shrinking of your social circle due to life changes. Friends have moved, retired, become less available due to grandchildren or other commitments. Your social world might already be smaller than it once was, which makes further isolation less noticeable. Second, cultural narratives about relationships suggest that coupling should be your priority, especially at this life stage. You might internalize the message that focusing on your romantic relationship is what you're supposed to do, and that maintaining a strong, independent social life means you're not committed enough. Third, if you're widowed or divorced after a long marriage, you may not remember what it's like to maintain friendships while in a serious relationship. You might think it's normal for friendships to take a back seat to romance. You don't realize that in a healthy relationship, both can coexist. Fourth, your friends and family might be initially happy you've found someone, which means they might not sound early alarms about your growing absence. By the time they become concerned enough to say something, the isolation has progressed significantly, and their concern might be met with defensiveness because you've been conditioned to distrust their perspective. Now, let's talk about why isolation is so dangerous. Your support system is your safety net. These are the people who know you well enough to notice when something's wrong. They're the people you can turn to if you need help. They're the people who will tell you hard truths about whether your relationship is healthy. They're your reality check when gaslighting makes you doubt your perceptions. When a narcissist isolates you, they eliminate the voices that might interfere with their control. They eliminate the people who might point out what they're doing. They eliminate your options for escape if the relationship becomes more overtly abusive. They become your sole source of social contact, emotional support, and even reality interpretation. This level of dependency is incredibly dangerous. Additionally, isolation makes you more vulnerable to all the other manipulation tactics. When you have no one to talk to about what you're experiencing, you can't reality test whether things are normal or healthy. When you have no friends to remind you of who you are outside the relationship, you lose yourself more easily. When you have no family support, you have nowhere to go if you need to leave. So how do you recognize isolation by inches while it's happening? And what do you do about it? First, regularly audit your social connections. Every few months, consciously evaluate. Am I seeing my friends as often as I want to? Am I maintaining my relationship with family members? Am I still attending my regular activities and groups? If the answer is no, ask yourself why. Are you genuinely choosing to spend more time with your partner, or are there subtle pressures making it difficult to maintain these connections? Second, notice the pattern around your social commitments. Does conflict or crisis frequently coincide with your plans to see others? Does your partner seem withdrawn or create guilt when you spend time with friends or family? Do you find yourself canceling plans more often than you used to? Do you feel anxious about your partner's reaction when you make plans without them? Third, pay attention to what your partner says about your loved ones. Are they consistently critical? Do they interpret others' behavior in the most negative light possible? Do they suggest these people don't really care about you or have your best interests at heart? Do they position themselves as the only person who truly understands you? Fourth, notice if you've become defensive about your relationship. When friends or family express concerns, do you immediately dismiss them or get angry? This defensiveness often indicates that on some level you know they're right, but you're too invested to admit it. Fifth, evaluate whether you feel free to maintain independent relationships. In a healthy relationship, both partners support each other, having rich lives outside the relationship. You don't need permission, feel guilty, or face consequences for seeing friends and family. If maintaining these relationships has become complicated, effortful, or conflict-inducing, something's wrong. If you've recognized that isolation by inches has been happening to you, here's what you need to do immediately. First, reconnect with your support system. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, you might feel embarrassed that you've been distant. Yes, you might need to apologize for not being available. Do it anyway. Reach out to friends, call your family. These people care about you and will be relieved to hear from you. Second, be honest about what's been happening. You don't need to trash your partner, but you can acknowledge that you've been so focused on your relationship that you let other relationships slide. Ask for their patience and support in rebuilding connections. Real friends will understand and will welcome you back. Third, re-establish your independent activities and commitments. Go back to book club, resume your volunteer work, pick up the hobbies you let drop, reclaim your independent life. You need to have sources of identity, purpose, and connection outside your romantic relationship. Fourth, observe your partner's response to your reconnection with others. A healthy partner will be happy that you're re-engaging with your life and support system. A narcissist will respond negatively. They'll increase the guilt trips, create more crises, become more critical of your friends and family, or even threaten the relationship. Their response will confirm whether you're dealing with a narcissist. Fifth, set and maintain firm boundaries. You have the right to independent relationships. Tell your partner that you're going to be seeing friends or family regularly and that this is non-negotiable. Don't ask permission. Don't apologize. Simply inform them of your plans. A healthy partner won't need this boundary enforced. A narcissist will fight it because it threatens their control. Sixth, resist the pullback into isolation. The narcissist will escalate their tactics when they realize you're rebuilding your support system. They'll create bigger crises, express more hurt, apply more pressure. Stand firm. Your relationships with others are essential to your well-being and safety. If your partner cannot or will not accept that you need and will maintain independent relationships, then you're with someone who doesn't respect your basic human need for connection. That person is not safe, and the relationship is not healthy. Isolation by inches is not love, it's control. Don't mistake possessiveness for devotion, jealousy for passion, or desire for your exclusive attention for deep connection. Real love wants you to thrive in all your relationships. Real love supports your connections with others. Real love doesn't require you to shrink your world down to just the two of you. Maintain your support system. Protect your relationships with friends and family. Stay connected to the people who know and love you. Your social connections are not optional luxuries. They're essential protections that keep you safe, healthy, and grounded in who you are outside any romantic relationship. Sign 8. The future promise manipulation. The 8th sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is a tactic that keeps you perpetually invested while never actually delivering. We call it future promise manipulation, and it's one of the most effective tools for keeping you committed to a relationship that consistently fails to meet your needs. Here's how it works. Instead of being present and building a healthy relationship in the now, the narcissist constantly dangles promises about what your future together will look like. They describe in vivid detail all the wonderful things you'll do together: the travel, the home renovations, the family gatherings, the retirement dreams. They make grand plans and beautiful promises. They paint a picture of a future that's so appealing, so exactly what you want, that you stay invested despite the present being disappointing or even painful. But here's the key. These promises never materialize, or if they do, they're always delayed, modified, or come with strings attached that weren't part of the original promise. The future keeps getting pushed further and further away. You're always waiting for the relationship to become what it's supposed to be, what they've promised it will be, but you never actually arrive at that future. This tactic is particularly insidious because it exploits your capacity for hope and your investment bias. Investment bias is a psychological phenomenon where the more you've invested in something, the harder it is to walk away, even when it's clearly not working. Every month you spend waiting for the promised future is another month of investment that makes it harder to cut your losses and leave. Let me introduce you to Angela, a 60-year-old former nurse who met Derek after her divorce. Angela had been clear about what she wanted in a new relationship: genuine partnership, someone who'd be an active participant in building a life together, travel opportunities she'd missed during her long marriage, and eventually, possibly marriage if the relationship progressed well. Derek seemed perfect. On their third date, he was already talking about their future. He described trips they'd take together. He'd always wanted to see Italy, and knew Angela did too. He talked about how when they moved in together, he'd finally be able to have the garden he'd always wanted, and he knew Angela loved gardening. He mentioned that he could see himself settling down again, maybe getting married to the right woman, and he thought Angela might be that woman. Angela was thrilled. She'd been dating for 2 years since her divorce and hadn't met anyone who wanted the same things she wanted. Derek seemed serious about building a future. But 6 months in, Angela started noticing a pattern. When she'd bring up actually planning the Italy trip, Derek would say not yet. His work schedule was too unpredictable, but maybe next year. When she'd mention moving in together, he'd say he wanted to, but he needed to save a bit more money first, or his lease wasn't up yet, or he wanted to wait until his daughter got settled in college. When Angela would reference his mentions of future marriage, he'd say he definitely wanted that, just not quite yet. He needed to be completely sure after his difficult divorce. Time kept passing. A year became 2 years. 2 years became 3. Italy never happened. Moving in together kept getting delayed for various reasons. Marriage was still in the future, but that future never seemed to arrive. But Derek kept talking about these things. He kept describing their future life together. He kept making promises. So Angela kept waiting, kept believing, kept investing. 4 years into the relationship, Angela's adult son pointed out that nothing Derek had promised had actually happened. Angela defended Derek, explaining all the valid reasons for the delays. But when her son asked her to consider whether the delays were genuine obstacles or deliberate stalling tactics, Angela couldn't answer. She realized she'd been living in a perpetual state of waiting for a future that was never going to arrive. This is future promise manipulation. Let's break down the specific ways this tactic manifests. First, there's disproportionate future focus. The narcissist talks far more about what you'll do in the future than what you're doing in the present. They're always focused on someday, eventually, when the time is right. This keeps you oriented toward tomorrow rather than evaluating whether today is actually good. Second, there's promise specificity without commitment. They describe the promised future in great detail, which makes it seem concrete and real. They talk about the specific places you'll visit, the house you'll buy, the life you'll build. But when you try to pin down actual plans, timelines, or commitments, they become vague. The promise is detailed, but the path to achieving it is always unclear. Third, there's conditional fulfillment. The promises always have conditions that conveniently never seem to be met. We'll do that once I get this promotion. We'll take that trip when I sort out my finances. We'll get married after my kids finish college. The conditions sound reasonable, but there's always a new condition once the first one is supposedly met. The goalpost keeps moving. Fourth, there's blame deflection for delays. When promises don't materialize, it's never their fault. It's circumstances, bad luck, timing, other people, the economy, anything but their deliberate choice not to follow through. This protects them from accountability while keeping you sympathetic to their struggle to fulfill the promises. Fifth, there's renewal of promises. Just when you're getting frustrated enough that you might walk away, they renew the promises with even more enthusiasm and detail. They're so sorry things haven't worked out as planned yet, but they're more committed than ever. They describe the future even more vividly. They make new promises or reaffirm old ones. This gives you a hit of hope that reinvests you for another period of waiting. Sixth, there's resentment of pressure. If you push for the promises to be actualized, they respond with resentment. They accuse you of being demanding, impatient, or not trusting them. They make you feel bad for wanting what they promised. This trains you to stop asking when the future will arrive and to just keep waiting passively. Seventh, there's comparison to negative alternatives. They frame the promised future in contrast to what they claim is the typical reality. Most couples don't travel like we're going to. Most relationships aren't as good as ours will be. I'm planning to give you so much more than your ex did. This makes you feel like you should be grateful for the promises, even though they're just promises and not reality. The psychological effect of future promise manipulation is that you're perpetually living in a state of anticipation rather than satisfaction. You're not building a real life together in the present, you're waiting for the life they've promised to begin. And that waiting can go on for years, even decades, with you investing your time, energy, resources, and emotional well-being into a relationship that's not actually giving you what you need right now. The reason this tactic is particularly effective on mature women is multi-layered. First, at this stage of life, you're very aware of time passing. You know you don't have unlimited time to waste. When someone promises you the things you want to experience before it's too late, those promises can feel urgent and precious. You don't want to walk away from what might be your last chance at these experiences. Second, you might be coming out of a long relationship where you didn't get to do things you wanted to do. Travel you postponed for kids, career moves you didn't make for a spouse, dreams you deferred. The promise of finally getting to do these things is powerfully appealing. The narcissist exploits your legitimate desires for experiences you've been denied. Third, mature women are often socialized to be patient and understanding. You're supposed to be flexible about timing, understanding about obstacles, willing to wait for your partner to be ready. The narcissist exploits this conditioning, framing their failure to deliver on promises as requiring your patience and understanding rather than recognizing it as manipulation. Fourth, you've likely learned through life experience that good things take time and that not everything happens according to plan. This wisdom is true in many contexts, but the narcissist weaponizes it. They frame your expectations of promise fulfillment as you being unrealistic or not understanding how life works, when actually you're simply holding them accountable for their own words. So, how do you distinguish between genuine shared future planning and future promise manipulation? Here are the key differences. Genuine future planning involves present action, reasonable timelines, mutual planning, flexibility within commitment, and proportional attention to present and future. When someone genuinely wants a future with you, they take concrete steps toward that future now. They don't just talk about traveling, they start researching trips, saving money, requesting time off work. The future they're planning has actual timelines, not just vague some days. You plan together, not them telling you what will happen. And they're as invested in making the present good as they are in planning the future. Future promise manipulation involves all talk, no action, perpetually delayed timelines, unilateral planning, rigid about commitment while vague about actualization, and minimal investment in present quality. They talk endlessly about the future but take no concrete steps toward it. The timeline is always just a bit further away. They tell you what you'll do rather than planning with you. They want you committed but won't commit to specific plans. And the present relationship is often mediocre or problematic, with the promised future being the only thing keeping you invested. Let me give you a comparison. Carol, a 57-year-old teacher, dated 2 men in succession. James talked from early on about wanting to travel. He and Carol discussed places they both wanted to see. Within 3 months, James suggested they start a travel fund that they both contributed to monthly. He researched destinations and showed Carol his research. 6 months in, they booked a trip to Costa Rica 8 months out, giving them time to prepare. The trip happened as planned. They started planning the next one during that trip. James wasn't just promising travel, he was actively making it happen. In contrast, Eric also talked constantly about travel. He described in vivid detail the trips he wanted to take with Carol: Europe, Asia, South America. He had it all planned in his mind. But 2 years in, they hadn't taken a single trip together. Eric always had reasons why now wasn't the right time. His work was too busy, his finances were tight, he needed to wait for his frequent flyer miles to accumulate. But the plans were still there, and he'd described them regularly, keeping Carol invested in a future that wasn't materializing. The difference was clear. James was building a future with Carol through present action. Eric was using future promises to keep Carol invested without actually having to deliver. So what do you do if you've identified future promise manipulation in your relationship? First, conduct an audit of promises versus reality. Make a list of what was promised and what's actually happened. Be honest about the ratio. If you've been together more than a year and no significant promises have materialized, that's a clear pattern. Second, set timelines and hold them accountable. Choose one important promise and set a specific, reasonable timeline for it to be actualized. Tell your partner this timeline. If they resist specific timelines, that's your answer. If they agree but the timeline passes without fulfillment, that's also your answer. Third, stop accepting excuses. When a promise isn't fulfilled, don't automatically accept whatever explanation they offer. Ask yourself, is this a genuine obstacle, or is this a pattern of delay? One legitimate reason for a delay is understandable. Multiple reasons across multiple promises indicate deliberate stalling. Fourth, focus on the present. Deliberately shift your attention from the promised future to the actual present. Is this relationship good right now? Are you happy today? Not in the promised someday. Would this relationship be acceptable to you if the future never arrived? If the answer is no, you're being kept in the relationship by future promises, and that's not healthy. Fifth, call out the pattern. Tell your partner you've noticed that many promises haven't materialized and that you need this to change. A healthy partner will hear this, acknowledge their role, and make genuine changes. A narcissist will become defensive, blame you for being demanding, or make new promises to placate you without changing the pattern. Sixth, set a deadline for yourself. Even if you don't tell them, set a private deadline. If these major promises haven't started to materialize by X date, you're leaving. Stick to this deadline. Don't let renewed promises move it. Seventh, be prepared to walk away from your investment. This is the hardest part. You've invested years. Walking away means accepting that time is gone, but staying means continuing to invest in something that's not giving you returns. The sunk cost fallacy says we tend to continue something because we've already invested so much, but wise decision-making recognizes when to cut losses. Remember, you deserve more than promises. You deserve a present that's fulfilling, a partner who follows through, a relationship that delivers what it offers. Don't spend your precious remaining years waiting for a future that exists only in words. Life is happening now, not someday, not eventually, now. If your relationship is only good in the promised future but disappointing in the actual present, you don't have a good relationship. You have a manipulation tactic keeping you trapped. You deserve to live the life you want now, not perpetually wait for it to begin. Don't let future promises blind you to present reality. Sign 9. The selective memory and reality distortion. The 9th sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is one of the most psychologically damaging tactics because it makes you doubt your own mind, memory, and perception of reality. We call it selective memory and reality distortion, and it's a form of gaslighting that's deployed so subtly and consistently that you begin to question whether you can trust your own judgment about anything. Gaslighting, named after the 1944 film Gaslight, is a manipulation tactic where someone makes you doubt your perception of reality. In its overt form, it's obvious. Someone blatantly denying things you know happened, insisting you're crazy, or telling you your memory is completely wrong about major events. Most people would recognize this as abusive, but the narcissist in disguise uses a much more subtle version. They don't tell you you're crazy. They don't blatantly deny obvious facts. Instead, they employ selective memory and reality distortion in ways that are just subtle enough that you start doubting yourself rather than doubting them. Here's how it manifests. You'll have a conversation where something is clearly said or agreed upon. Later, when you reference that conversation, they have zero memory of it, or they remember it completely differently, or they insist you misunderstood what was said, or they acknowledge the conversation happened but claim the details you remember are wrong. This doesn't happen once, it happens regularly. You find yourself constantly in situations where your memory of events differs from theirs, and because they're so confident in their version, because they seem genuinely confused by your version, because they sometimes accuse you of misremembering or deliberately twisting things, you start wondering if maybe you're the one who's wrong. Maybe your memory isn't as good as you thought. Maybe you are misunderstanding things. Maybe you're being overly sensitive or reading things into situations that weren't there. This erosion of confidence in your own perception is exactly what they're aiming for. Once you doubt your own mind, you become dependent on them to tell you what's real. You lose trust in yourself and transfer that trust to them. And once that's happened, they can shape reality however they want because you no longer trust your own judgment enough to challenge them. Let me tell you about Doris, a 64-year-old accountant, precise by nature and profession. Doris met Paul, and early in their relationship, something strange started happening. After important conversations, Doris would reference what was discussed, and Paul would have completely different recollections. For example, Doris clearly remembered Paul saying he'd been married twice before. But months later, when she mentioned his 2 previous marriages in conversation with friends, Paul corrected her in front of everyone, saying he'd only been married once. Doris was confused. She was certain he'd said twice. But Paul was so confident, and she couldn't point to a specific moment to prove her memory, so she apologized for the error. Another time, they discussed Doris's discomfort with Paul smoking in her house. She'd asked him not to, and he'd agreed. But a few weeks later, he was smoking inside. When Doris reminded him of their agreement, Paul looked genuinely confused. He said she'd asked him to cut down, not stop entirely inside. He insisted he'd been honoring that by only smoking a few cigarettes a day inside, instead of his usual pack. Doris was certain she'd asked him not to smoke inside at all, but Paul's version was so specific, and he seemed so certain, that Doris started doubting whether she'd been clear enough. This pattern continued across multiple domains. Conversations about money, agreements about boundaries, discussions about the future. Paul consistently had different memories of these conversations than Doris did, and he was so convincing, so genuinely seeming to believe his version, that Doris began to seriously question her own mental faculties. She wondered if she was developing memory problems. She even made an appointment with her doctor to be screened for cognitive decline. The doctor found nothing wrong with Doris's memory or cognition. This should have been reassuring. Instead, it left Doris more confused. If her mind was fine, why did her memories consistently differ from Paul's? She didn't yet understand that she wasn't the problem. Paul's selective memory and reality distortion were the problem. Let me break down the specific tactics narcissists use in selective memory and reality distortion. First, there's strategic amnesia. They conveniently forget conversations or agreements that committed them to something or that established a boundary. You'll say, "But you agreed to X," and they'll respond with genuine seeming surprise, "I never said that. Where did you get that idea?" They don't remember because remembering would hold them accountable. And selective amnesia releases them from that accountability. Second, there's detail manipulation. They don't deny the conversation happened, but they remember the details differently in ways that serve their interests. "Yes, we talked about finances, but I said I'd contribute when I could, not that I'd split everything 50-50. You're changing what was actually said. By changing key details, they reshape what was agreed upon without the obvious dishonesty of complete denial. Third, there's interpretation shifting. They claim you misunderstood or misinterpreted what was clearly communicated. When I said I wanted space, I meant I needed a night to myself occasionally, not that I wanted you to back off entirely. You're reading things wrong. This makes you feel like you're bad at understanding communication, when actually they're deliberately creating confusion. Fourth, there's emotion invalidation. They deny not just facts, but feelings. You'll say their action hurt you, and they'll insist it wasn't hurtful, you're too sensitive, or you're overreacting. They don't deny the action, but they deny your right to your emotional response to it. You start doubting whether your feelings are valid. Fifth, there's witness manipulation. When there are witnesses to conversations or events, they either avoid having important discussions in front of others, or they reframe what witnesses saw in ways that make you doubt what you collectively experienced. Or if witnesses support your version, they dismiss those witnesses as biased or mistaken. Sixth, there's incremental revision. They don't change their story all at once, which would be obvious. They shift it gradually across multiple retellings. The first time they reference an event, it's one way. The next reference includes a slight modification. The third reference has changed more. By the fourth or fifth reference, the story has morphed significantly. But it happened so gradually, you're not sure when it changed or if you were wrong. about the original version. Seventh, there's confident wrongness. They state their version with absolute certainty, even when it's completely false. This confidence is powerful. We're psychologically primed to assume that people who speak with certainty are probably right. Their unwavering confidence in a false version of reality makes you doubt your own accurate but less confidently held memory. Eighth, there's documentation resistance. If you start writing things down or trying to document conversations, they respond negatively. They act hurt that you don't trust them. They accuse you of being paranoid. They claim you're trying to trap them. This resistance to documentation is because documentation prevents them from revising reality. The reason selective memory and reality distortion is particularly damaging to mature women is complex. First, our culture already feeds women messages that they're overly emotional, too sensitive, or don't understand things rationally. The narcissist exploits these existing insecurities. When they tell you you're misremembering or misinterpreting, it confirms fears you might already have about yourself. Second, you might be at an age where cognitive decline is a legitimate health concern. You've heard about Alzheimer's, dementia, memory problems that can emerge in later life. When someone consistently tells you your memory is wrong, it's terrifying because it might indicate a real health problem. The narcissist weaponizes this fear, making you focus on your supposedly failing memory rather than their deliberate distortion. Third, women are often socialized to defer to others' judgment, especially men's. If a confident man tells you something different from what you remember, you might be inclined to trust his version over your own. The narcissist exploits this gendered socialization. Fourth, if you're someone who naturally doubts yourself or tends towards self-criticism, you're more vulnerable to gaslighting. The narcissist spots this vulnerability and exploits it. Every instance of selective memory and reality distortion feeds into your existing tendency to question yourself. So, how do you distinguish between normal memory differences and selective memory and reality distortion? Here are the key markers. Normal memory differences are random, acknowledged, minor, about details rather than substance, and both people participate in memory errors. Both people sometimes misremember. Both people are sometimes wrong. Memory differences occur across all types of events, not just ones that serve a particular person's interests. When someone realizes they misremembered, they acknowledge it and correct themselves. The differences are about minor details, not major agreements or significant conversations. Selective memory and reality distortion is patterned, denied, major, about accountability and boundaries, and unidirectional. The narcissist is always the one who's supposedly right. Memory differences consistently favor their interests, occur around agreements that would hold them accountable, and involve significant issues like boundaries, money, commitments. They never or rarely acknowledge being wrong about their memory, and they frame your different memory as your problem, not a normal human variation. Here's a comparison. Eleanor, a 59-year-old photographer, dated 2 men. With Martin, they'd occasionally have different memories of things. One time, Eleanor thought they'd agreed to meet at 6. Martin thought they'd said 7. They laughed about it, figured one of them must have misheard, and moved on. Another time, Martin could have sworn they discussed visiting his mother next month, but Eleanor had no memory of that conversation. Martin said, Maybe I'm mixing you up with a conversation with my sister. I could have sworn we talked about it, but if you don't remember, I probably didn't actually mention it to you." These normal memory variations went both ways, were acknowledged and weren't patterns. In contrast, with Jeffrey, Eleanor constantly found her memory questioned. Jeffrey would consistently deny conversations that Eleanor clearly remembered, or he'd remember them differently in ways that always served his interests. When Eleanor documented a particularly important conversation in her journal immediately after it happened, She later referenced that conversation, only to have Jeffrey insist it hadn't happened that way. When she showed him her journal entry, he said she must have written it down wrong or was deliberately creating false documentation to trap him. The pattern with Jeffrey was clear. His memory was always supposedly correct, Eleanor's was always supposedly faulty, and the memory differences always benefited Jeffrey by releasing him from accountability or allowing him to violate boundaries. So what do you do if you're experiencing selective memory and reality distortion in your relationship? First, trust yourself. This is the most important and difficult step. If you remember something clearly, trust that memory. Don't let someone else's confident wrongness override your knowledge of your own experience. Even if you can't prove it, even if they insist you're wrong, trust yourself. Second, document everything. I know this feels paranoid and unromantic. Do it anyway. After important conversations, write down what was said, when it was said, and who was present. Date your documentation. If possible, send follow-up texts or emails summarizing conversations, which creates a written record. When they claim something different later, you have documentation to refer back to. Third, watch their response to documentation. A healthy partner might be puzzled by your need to document conversations, but they'll ultimately accept it if you explain it's important to you. A narcissist will respond with hostility, hurt, or accusations. They don't want documentation because it prevents them from revising reality. Fourth, stop trying to convince them. When you have different memories of something, state your version once clearly, then disengage. Don't get drawn into long arguments about who's right. Their goal is to make you doubt yourself through these exhausting circular arguments. Just say, "My memory of this is X," and then end the discussion. Fifth, reality test with others. When possible, have important conversations with witnesses present. Talk to trusted friends or family members about your experiences. Do they notice the same patterns? Can they confirm your memories of shared experiences? External validation helps you maintain confidence in your own perceptions. Sixth, look for the pattern. 1 or 2 memory differences are normal. Consistent patterns where your memory is always supposedly wrong, especially about important issues that would hold them accountable, indicate deliberate manipulation, not normal human memory variation. Seventh, name the behavior. Tell them directly, "I notice that we frequently have very different memories of conversations, and the differences always seem to favor your interests. This concerns me." Watch how they respond. A healthy partner will take this seriously and work with you to figure out what's happening. A narcissist will become defensive, turn it around on you, or escalate the gaslighting. If you've identified that you're experiencing selective memory and reality distortion, you need to understand something crucial. This is psychological abuse. It's designed to make you doubt your mind, so you become dependent on the abuser to tell you what's real. This is profoundly damaging to your mental health and sense of self. You cannot fix this with better communication or by trying harder to prove your memories. The narcissist knows exactly what they're doing. They're choosing to distort reality to maintain control over you. No amount of evidence, documentation, or explanation will change this behavior, because it's not a misunderstanding, it's a deliberate tactic. The only solution is to leave the relationship. You cannot maintain your mental health in a relationship where your reality is constantly denied and your memories are consistently invalidated. You'll lose yourself. You'll become a shell of who you were, constantly confused, constantly doubting, constantly seeking their approval to confirm that your perceptions are valid. You deserve to trust your own mind. You deserve a partner who respects your memory and perception. You deserve a relationship where both people acknowledge when they're wrong and where memory differences are normal variations, not weapons of control. If someone is systematically making you doubt your sanity, get out. Your mind is not failing you. they're deliberately breaking it. That's not love, that's abuse. Sign 10. The strategic incompatibility timing. The 10th and final sign you're dating a narcissist in disguise is one that can leave you feeling devastated and used after you've invested significant time and emotion. We call it strategic incompatibility timing, and it's one of the cruelest tactics because it involves deliberately hiding or misrepresenting fundamental incompatibilities until you're deeply committed, then revealing them in ways that leave you with impossible choices. In healthy relationship development, people are reasonably honest about who they are and what they want from early on. You discuss values, life goals, deal breakers, and compatibility factors within the first few months. You don't need to lay everything out on the first date, but there's transparency about major factors that would affect compatibility. This allows both people to make informed decisions about whether to invest further in the relationship. The narcissist in disguise does the opposite. They intentionally obscure, minimize, or outright lie about factors they know would be deal breakers for you. They might hide their actual financial situation, their lack of interest in the future you want, their incompatible lifestyle preferences, their true relationship with their ex or children, their addiction or mental health issues, their actual work situation, or their real intentions for the relationship. They keep these truths hidden until you're so invested that revealing them creates maximum leverage for them. The timing of these revelations is not accidental. They wait until you've made significant commitments, emotional, financial, practical, or temporal. Then they reveal the incompatibility. But it's framed not as "I lied to you," but as "this is who I've always been. You just didn't ask, or things have changed, or I thought I wanted that but I've realized I don't." They make you feel like you should have known, or that it's not their fault circumstances have changed, when actually they deliberately concealed incompatibilities they knew existed from the start. Let me tell you about Marion, a 58-year-old dentist. Marion had been clear from her first date with Robert that she wanted to eventually remarry. She'd been divorced for 3 years and was ready for a committed partnership leading to marriage. Robert said he wanted the same thing. He talked about being ready to settle down again after his divorce 5 years prior. He discussed his belief in marriage as an institution and said he'd just been waiting to find the right person. Marion and Robert dated for 2 years. They moved in together after 18 months. Marion sold her condo and moved into Robert's house, which made financial sense since his house was larger. She contributed significantly to renovations they did together. She merged her life with his, meeting his children, spending holidays with his family, building relationships with his friends. After 2.5 years, Marion started bringing up marriage more concretely. She was 60 now. She wanted to formalize their partnership. And here's where Robert dropped a bomb. He didn't actually want to get married again. He'd thought he did, but having been through one divorce, he'd realized marriage wasn't for him. He was happy with their relationship as it was. Why did they need a piece of paper? Marion was devastated. She'd been explicitly clear from the beginning that marriage was important to her. Robert had agreed. She'd invested 2.5 years, sold her home, built a life with him, all under the understanding that they were building toward marriage. And now, after all that investment, he was revealing that marriage was never actually on the table. When Marion expressed her hurt and betrayal, Robert acted like she was being unreasonable. He said people's feelings change, that she should be happy with what they had, that it was unfair of her to threaten the relationship over a piece of paper. But this wasn't about a piece of paper to Marion. It was about the fact that Robert had known from the start that marriage was a deal breaker for her, had pretended he wanted the same thing too. Secure her commitment, then revealed his true position only after she'd made significant sacrifices and investments that made leaving very difficult. This is strategic incompatibility timing. Let's break down the specific tactics. First, there's initial false alignment. At the beginning, The narcissist claims to want exactly what you want. They're enthusiastic about shared goals. They mirror your values and life plans. This false alignment gets you invested in the relationship. Second, there's gradual reveal. They don't announce major incompatibilities all at once. They reveal them gradually, testing how much you'll tolerate. First, they might mention casually that they're reconsidering something. Then later, they're even less interested. Eventually, they reveal they never really wanted it at all. The gradual nature of the reveal makes it harder to pinpoint when things changed, and easier for them to gaslight you about whether they ever really said they wanted what you want. Third, there's maximum investment timing. The major reveal happens after you've made significant investments, after you've moved in together, or relocated for them, or made financial commitments, or turned down other opportunities, or distanced from people who expressed concerns. The timing maximizes the cost of leaving. Fourth, there's blame shifting. When you react to the incompatibility, they make it your problem. You're too focused on labels like marriage. You're not being flexible. You're threatening the relationship over something that shouldn't matter. They position themselves as reasonable and you as demanding, when actually you're simply expecting what was promised. Fifth, there's the bait-and-switch framing. They claim they've changed or realized something new about themselves. I thought I wanted kids, but I've realized I don't. I've re-evaluated my feelings about monogamy. I've decided retirement isn't for me after all. They frame fundamental incompatibilities as personal growth or self-discovery rather than admitting they lied or misrepresented themselves from the start. Sixth, there's the sunk cost trap. They count on the sunk cost fallacy, keeping you in the relationship. You've invested so much, years of your life, emotion, money, practical commitments. Walking away means accepting that investment is lost. They know this makes you more likely to compromise on your actual needs and values to avoid losing the investment. Seventh, there's strategic omission justification. If confronted about hiding major incompatibilities, they claim it's not lying if you didn't explicitly ask, or they say they didn't think it was important to bring up, or they insist they'd have told you if you'd asked the right questions. They put the burden on you to have extracted information they should have provided freely. The reason strategic incompatibility timing is particularly devastating for mature women is multifaceted. First, time is precious at this stage of life. You don't have decades to waste on relationships that were never going to give you what you need. Discovering major incompatibilities after years of investment is particularly painful because you're acutely aware of how much time you've lost. Second, there are practical investments that are harder to unwind at this life stage. If you've sold your home, relocated, retired based on relationship plans, or made major financial decisions, extricating yourself is significantly more complicated than it would have been in your 20s. The narcissist knows this and times revelations accordingly. Third, there's the emotional toll of starting over. Finding a compatible partner gets harder as you age, simply due to smaller dating pools. The narcissist exploits your fear that if you leave, you might not find anyone else. They count on you accepting less than you want, rather than facing being single again. Fourth, there's the identity impact. At this life stage, you've likely built a shared identity as a couple, merged social circles, established routines and traditions together. Unraveling this is emotionally and socially complex. The narcissist knows that this identity investment makes leaving harder. So how do you protect yourself from strategic incompatibility timing? Here are critical strategies. First, have explicit conversations about deal breakers early. Within the first few dates, discuss what's non-negotiable for you. Marriage or not, children or not, where you'll live, financial arrangements, lifestyle preferences. Don't wait months or years to have these conversations. If someone is right for you, these discussions won't scare them off. If someone is wrong for you, Better to know immediately than after years of investment. Second, requires specificity and consistency. Don't accept vague answers about important issues. If they say they're open to marriage someday, ask when and under what conditions. If they say they might want to relocate eventually, ask where and when. If they say they're financially stable, ask for specifics, and then watch for consistency. Their position on important issues should remain stable, not shift depending on what you want to hear. Third, verify important claims. If they say they're financially stable, see evidence. If they claim they're divorced, verify it. If they say they want marriage, ask why they want it and what their timeline is. Don't just accept what they tell you. A trustworthy person won't be offended by reasonable verification of important claims. Fourth, observe their relationship history. How did their previous relationships end? Do they have a pattern of major reveals that blindsided their partners? Can you talk to an ex who will give you honest information? While people do grow and change, patterns often repeat. If they've done this before, they'll likely do it again. Fifth, set time limits for major commitments. Don't sell your house and move in with someone you've only known 6 months. Don't make major financial decisions based on a relationship that's less than 2 years old. Don't relocate across the country for someone you don't know deeply. Give relationships time to reveal incompatibilities before making irreversible commitments. Sixth, maintain independence as long as possible. Keep your own home, your own finances, your own social connections until you're absolutely certain about compatibility. This independence preserves your options if major incompatibilities are revealed later. Seventh, trust your instincts about inconsistencies. If something they're saying now doesn't align with something they said before, address it immediately. Don't wait. Don't explain it away. Say directly, "You told me X before, and now you're saying Y. These don't align." Which is true? Force clarity early. If you're currently in a situation where major incompatibilities have been revealed after significant investment, here's what you need to know. First, this is not your fault. You didn't fail to ask the right questions. You're not being demanding for expecting what was promised. You were deliberately misled, and that's not on you. Second, the sunk cost fallacy is a fallacy for a reason. Yes, you've invested time, emotion, and resources. But continuing to invest in a relationship that can't give you what you need means throwing good time after bad. Cut your losses. Don't compound the mistake by investing more years. Third, their framing of you as inflexible is manipulation. You're not being rigid for wanting what you've always said you wanted and what they claimed they wanted too. You're being reasonable. They're the ones who lied or misrepresented themselves. Fourth, the relationship they're offering is not the relationship you signed up for. If marriage was important to you and they're now saying they won't marry you, that's not the relationship you agreed to. If having a partner who shares your home was important and they're now saying they need separate residences, that's not what you committed to. You have every right to leave a relationship that isn't what was advertised. Fifth, don't let fear keep you trapped. Yes, starting over is hard. Yes, you might be single for a while or permanently, but staying in a relationship that fundamentally can't meet your needs is worse than being single. You cannot compromise on your core values and needs without losing yourself. Sixth, consult with professionals about practical extrication. If you've merged finances, sold property, relocated, or made other major commitments, talk to a lawyer and financial advisor about how to unwind these arrangements as cleanly as possible. Don't let practical complications force you to stay in a relationship that's wrong for you. Seventh, learn from it. Understand what red flags you missed or rationalized. What would you do differently next time? How will you protect yourself from this happening again? This isn't about self-blame, It's about wisdom that protects your future. Strategic incompatibility. Timing is a cruel tactic that treats you as a target to be secured through deception rather than a partner to be honest with. You deserve someone who's upfront about who they are and what they want from the start. You deserve a partner who wouldn't dream of misrepresenting themselves to trick you into investing in a relationship that can't actually meet your needs. Don't stay with someone because of what you've invested. Stay only if the relationship is actually good and actually gives you what you need. And if it doesn't, if major incompatibilities have been revealed after you were led to believe you were compatible, have the courage to leave. Your remaining years are too precious to spend them in a relationship built on false pretenses. We've now covered all 10 signs that you might be dating a narcissist in disguise. Let's quickly recap what we've discussed today, because recognizing these patterns could save you years of heartache and protect the life you've worked so hard to build. We talked about the customized perfect partner syndrome, where they mirror exactly what you want until they've secured you. Then the mask starts to slip. We explored the selective vulnerability trap, where they show strategic emotion to manipulate your sympathy and bypass your defenses. We examined gradual boundary erosion, the slow dismantling of your limits until you've lost your autonomy without even realizing it happened. We discussed the strategic competence-incompetence swap, where they're mysteriously capable when it serves them, but helpless when you need them to contribute. We covered the subtle financial entanglement, the sophisticated ways they access your assets while appearing financially independent. We explored the empathy simulation, the chilling performance of care without any genuine feeling behind it. We examined isolation by inches, the gradual separation from your support system that leaves you dependent on them. We discussed future promise. Manipulation, the endless promises of tomorrow used to keep you invested in a disappointing today. We covered selective memory and reality distortion, the gaslighting that makes you doubt your own mind. And finally, we examined strategic incompatibility timing, the cruel reveal of deal breakers only after you've made significant investments. These tactics are interconnected. A narcissist in disguise rarely uses just one. They employ multiple strategies that work together to trap you in a relationship that serves them while harming you. They present themselves as exactly what you've been looking for. They bypass your defenses through manufactured vulnerability. They erode your boundaries and isolate you from support. They fail to contribute while draining your resources. They simulate empathy while feeling none. They keep you focused on a future that never arrives while distorting your present reality. And they reveal incompatibilities only when leaving becomes maximally difficult. This is not love. This is sophisticated predation. And it's specifically targeting women like you, mature women with resources, independence, accomplishments, and a lifetime of learned compassion and understanding that can be exploited. But here's what I want you to understand most clearly. Recognizing these patterns is not about becoming cynical or closed off to love. It's about developing the wisdom to distinguish between genuine partnership and sophisticated manipulation. Real love doesn't require these tactics. Healthy partners don't need to mirror you perfectly because compatibility develops naturally. They don't weaponize vulnerability because their openness is authentic. They respect your boundaries because your autonomy matters to them. They contribute equally because they want to build a life with you, not off of you. They feel genuine empathy because they actually care about your well-being. They want you to maintain your support system because they're secure in your relationship. They follow through on promises because their words align with their intentions. They're honest about compatibility factors because they respect you enough to let you make informed choices. And their memory aligns with yours because they're not trying to rewrite reality to serve their interests. You don't have to settle for someone who employs these manipulative tactics. You don't have to accept a relationship that requires you to doubt yourself, abandon your boundaries, sacrifice your support system, drain your resources, or accept less than what was promised. You deserve real love, honest love, reciprocal love, safe love. If you've recognized your current relationship in today's discussion, I know how painful that realization is. You might be feeling shocked, betrayed, angry, scared, or deeply sad. Those feelings are valid. You've been manipulated by someone you trusted. That's a profound violation. But you also need to understand something crucial. This is not your fault. You didn't cause this by being too trusting, too generous, too loving, or too forgiving. These are beautiful qualities. The problem isn't that you have them. The problem is that a narcissist exploited them. You were targeted because you're valuable. Narcissists don't waste their time on people who have nothing to offer. They targeted you because of your strengths, not because of any weakness. And now that you see what's happening, you have a choice. You can stay and accept that this is what your relationship will be, which I absolutely do not recommend. Or you can protect yourself. You can reclaim your boundaries. You can rebuild your support system. You can take back control of your finances. You can trust your own perceptions. You can leave. Leaving is hard. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, especially after years of investment, especially with the practical complications that often exist, especially with the fear of being alone or of not finding someone else. But staying is harder. Staying means years more of being manipulated, controlled, drained, and gradually losing yourself. Staying means wasting your precious remaining years on someone who's using you rather than loving you. You have already survived hard things in your life. You've gotten through difficult relationships, loss, challenges, and pain before. You have resilience that you might have forgotten about, but it's still there. You can do this hard thing too, and on the other side of it is freedom. On the other side is peace. On the other side is the opportunity to rebuild a life that's truly yours, whether that includes a healthier partnership in the future or a fulfilling single life. You deserve to wake up every morning feeling safe. You deserve to trust the person you're sharing your life with. You deserve to have your needs met, your boundaries respected, your reality acknowledged, your contributions valued. You deserve authentic love, not a sophisticated performance of it. If you need help leaving, reach out to a domestic violence organization, even if you don't think your situation qualifies as abuse. Many of these tactics we've discussed today are forms of emotional and financial abuse. These organizations can connect you with resources, legal assistance, counseling, and practical support. Talk to trusted friends or family members. See a therapist who specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery. Consult with a lawyer about protecting your assets and rights. Build a team of support around you, and remember, you are not alone. Thousands of women are going through exactly what you're experiencing. There's no shame in having been manipulated by a skilled predator. The shame belongs entirely to them, not to you. Now, I want to ask you to do something for me and for other women who need this information. If this video was helpful to you, please hit that like button. Your likes help this video reach more women who need to see it. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your story if you feel comfortable. Your experience might be exactly what another woman needs to hear to realize she's not crazy, she's not alone, and she deserves better. Share this video with any friends who might benefit from this information. You might be saving someone from years of manipulation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our content. We're building a community of strong, informed women who refuse to accept less than they deserve. Your subscription helps us grow that community. And if you want to directly support the work we do, please consider sending a super thanks. Creating in-depth, researched content like this takes significant time and resources. Your super thanks directly supports our ability to continue producing videos that empower women with the knowledge they need to protect themselves and build the lives they deserve. Remember, Knowledge is power. Understanding these tactics gives you the power to recognize them, resist them, and reject them. You've taken the time to watch this entire video, which shows your commitment to understanding what you might be dealing with and protecting yourself. That takes courage and wisdom. Trust yourself. Trust your perceptions. Trust your memories. Trust your feelings. If something seems wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that your very reasonable reactions to unreasonable behavior make you the problem. You are enough, exactly as you are. You are worthy of real love. You are deserving of genuine partnership. You are valuable beyond your resources, your caretaking, or what you can provide to someone else. You are a whole, complete person who deserves to be seen, valued, and loved for who you authentically are. Don't spend another year, month, or even day accepting less than that. Your life is happening now, not someday, not when they change, not when circumstances are different. Now, make your now count. Make your now yours. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, protect yourself, value yourself, and remember, you deserve better, and better is out there. You just have to be brave enough to leave what's not working to find it. Until next time, stay strong, stay wise, and know that you're not alone in this journey. We're here for you, cheering you on, believing in you, and supporting you every step of the way.